The night sky was lit up by lightning, a strong wind blew, bringing with it a torrential downpour, and someone at this time wondered what it would be like to suddenly lose one's sight. The girl slept peacefully in her bed and did not know that someone was suffering from the fact that wherever you looked, there was only black, muddy water, and when you opened your eyes, you saw nothing, only darkness around. And fear envelops the whole body, sticky and heavy. At that moment, in the sky, with a loud crack, a bright lightning appeared. In another room, a man was tossing and turning on his bed in pain. He understood that no matter how hard he struggled, there was no end in sight, and the endless darkness was drawing him deeper and deeper. At that moment, from a terrible sound, the girl who was sleeping peacefully opened her eyes. The man, covering his face with his hand, felt as if he was drowning in the middle of the sea, slowly sinking to the bottom, and even with his eyes closed, the darkness enveloped everything and did not let go. The girl ran out of the room, and the man, in pitch darkness, desperately tried to get out and fought for his life with all his might. The servants in the corridor were discussing where Mrs. Selva was, and someone said that she was delayed because of the storm. Everyone realized that her absence was very inopportune. The girl who ran up to them asked where the gentleman was, and one of the maids answered that he was in that room. After this, she asked if there might be a window open somewhere, to which she was told that a maid had come during the day and opened the window to air the room. All the servants gathered in front of the master's room. They were afraid to go in there and thought that if Mrs. Selva was at home, then she would go in there herself. Only one girl dared to go in there. When she turned the handle, the rest quietly whispered that it would end in disaster. For a moment she froze, gathering her courage because she, like everyone else, was scared. But then the girl opened the door and looked into the room, from which came the smell of medicinal tea and the smell of wine. She saw an open window from which light from lightning was entering the room and heard the master groaning in pain. He tossed and turned in bed, covering his eyes with his hands, in the light coming from the window. The girl remembered that the gentleman felt pain even from the slightest light. At that moment, without thinking, she rushed to the open window, and then, closing it, she sharply pulled the curtains, creating semi-darkness in the room. She fastened the curtains tightly so that they could not swing open, but the man was still groaning in pain as she stood by the closed window. Then the girl approached the bed and, touching the gentleman with her hand, said that now everything was okay. Suddenly she saw the man's hand reach out to her and try to pull away. But the gentleman was faster. He pushed the girl onto the bed, sat on top and pinned her arms above her head. And then the man said that a servant who had sneaked into the master's chambers could have only one of two goals. Leaning towards the girl's face, he added that it was either murder or seduction. Sweat was pouring down his face, and it was distorted with the pain he had experienced. But that didn't stop him from thinking that she might have had both goals. To this, the girl replied that if that had been the goal, a woman who knew how to conceal her presence and was proficient in weapons, more experienced in men's affairs, and more attractive would have come. Hearing this, the gentleman, touching her face, asked if she really had such an ugly face, to which she replied that you couldn't call her attractive. Having sat down, the man got angry and asked if she really thought that because he was blind, he was a fool and any hole would suit him. To this, the girl replied that it was slander, and the man, getting angry, asked again whether it really was slander. And then, grabbing her by the throat and slightly strangling her, he asked if she knew who had deprived him of his sight. Then the master added that it was the same servant as she, and asked if she wanted to know how it happened. Still strangling the girl, he said that while he was sleeping drunk, she snuck into the bedroom and splashed poison in his eyes. After all, when he returned to the estate from the war, this was the best gift from his brother. Then the man stood up and, hitting the girl in the face, ordered her to say what order she had received. After clearing her throat, she replied that she came in because of the downpour, because she wanted to close the window. At that moment, the man suddenly said that despite the fact that his eyes were blind, his reproductive function was fine, and if a secret child was born somewhere, there would be problems. And then he added, was she really ordered to kill him? Upon hearing this, the girl exclaimed that this was a misunderstanding. The man, adjusting his hair with his hand, said with disdain that these were just empty words. The girl, stubbornly, said that then she would prove it and offered to search her body, since she was not hiding any weapons or poison. And if he still has doubts, then he can do with her as he pleases, the maid added, looking at the master. The man, taking the girl by the head with one hand and opening her mouth with the other, said that he would check every corner of her body, every inch. Putting his fingers into the girl's mouth, the gentleman asked if she was scared. And then he added that she should run away from this estate, but she replied that she had nowhere to go. Taking the straps of her nightgown in his hand, the man said that this was her last chance. Then he jerked his hand angrily and tore off the straps. The girl closed her eyes without resisting, and the gentleman noticed that he was hearing her voice for the first time. Inhaling the maid's scent, he smelled laundry soap and realized that she was from the laundry, to which the girl replied that she had arrived a week ago. The gentleman, examining the girl, touched her body with his hands and then asked what her name was. Crossing her arms over her chest and turning away, she answered in a trembling voice that her name was Rose. The man, hovering over the girl, added threateningly that she would regret not having run away from here. On the northern outskirts of Delosa, there is a country estate of the noble family of Valdemar. Its owner was a man with a violent temper and a difficult character. In this place, very strange rules were in effect. The first rule was not to turn on the light on the first floor, where the gentleman lives. The second rule is that all rooms should have black curtains that block out daylight. The third rule is that everything has its own strictly defined place, and even any small thing cannot be moved without permission. In this estate, one cannot ask questions, and servants must only obey orders and submit. People call this place the lair of the beast. At that moment, the door to the master's room creaked open. The servants, turning towards the sound, were very surprised, not expecting what they would see. A girl came out of the room in a torn dress, and people whispered, unable to believe that this was the master's work. And she stood there, holding her nightdress with her hands so that it would not slip off. And I thought that it was my own stupidity that had led me to cross the threshold of this house. The girl remembered that her parents served in the house of the Valdemar family as simple servants. Apparently their only daughter was so dear to them that they gave her a very beautiful name, not in keeping with her status. She ate better than her parents, wore better clothes, and, at her parents' request, went to boarding school in the north, in Cielcha. Studying brought her joy, and, for the sake of her devoted parents, she became even more thirsty for knowledge. When the girl, standing in front of the mirror, was examining the bruises on her neck, she heard a voice that said that Mrs. Selva was calling her. Thinking that for her thirst for knowledge she would have to pay for the sins of her parents, she replied that she was going. Having seated the girl opposite her at the table, Mrs. Selva asked if everything was okay with her neck, to which she answered positively. The woman, placing her hand on her chest, asked if Rose was frightened and added that she had just been away, and then, as the head servant, apologized. Then the senior maid added that the master had been much kinder before, and Rose, hearing this, said that she would not leave because of such trifles. To this, the woman remarked that since she had come to this estate, things had become even better. She remembered that it was a snowy night when the gentleman was brought in without the flag of the Valdemar family tied to his saddle like luggage. He could not even walk without support. Although he had no one in the main house to rely on, who would come to see the decrepit old woman, Mrs. Selva added. The girl suddenly said that she heard that the woman raised the gentleman. To this, Mrs. Selva replied that she was his wet nurse and had looked after him with her own hands, so he treated her with understanding. Sadly, the senior maid added that even as he grew older, the master remained an impeccable, honest, and noble man. Lowering her head, the girl suddenly asked who this woman was. And then, looking up at the senior maid, she asked how she dared to do such a thing to Ezekiel. To this, Mrs. Selva replied that most likely Mr. Akanaus was behind that woman, although by all the rules, he was the heir. But instead of him, Ezekiel went into the army, and he turned out to be shameless. The girl asked if there were any traces of the criminal, to which the woman replied that they were currently collecting information, and the gentleman said that it was a woman with brown hair. And also, Mrs. Selva assumed that she was probably a real beauty, because if she was plotting with Mr. Akanaus, then she was certainly of extraordinary appearance. His bad reputation surpasses all rumors, because when he sees a beautiful woman, he cannot resist. Smiling, the woman added that if the girl had not had red hair, she would have suspected her, because she was a beauty. The girl was surprised that her hair color was called red and thanked for the compliment. At that moment, touching her hair, she thought that it was not quite chestnut-colored, but not quite as red as it might seem to some. Having stood up, Mrs. Selva, saying that it was almost lunchtime, decided to end the chatter and advised the girl to have a good rest today and thanked her for her work. Returning to her room, Rose sat on her bed, her head bowed, illuminated by the rays of sunlight that fell through the window. At that moment, the girl thought about the hero who led to victory in the War of the Roses, Ezekiel Valdemar. She remembered that he had returned in triumph, covered with glory, and was to enjoy for a long time the honor of being the savior of the country. Holding the bottle in her hands, the girl thought that only half a bottle of poison was enough to take away his sight and reduce him to the likeness of a beast. Bent over with shame, she remembered what had prompted her to embark on this path. The girl remembered how she stood on her knees before Mr. Achenhouse and begged him to forgive her. She explained that her parents, in their ignorance, had made an unforgivable mistake. With her head bowed, the girl begged to show mercy to her stupid parents, and to allow her to atone for this with her life at least once. When the man asked why on earth he should do this, she raised her head. The girl saw the gentleman turn in her direction and grin evilly, looking at her. And then he said that if one life were to atone for the lives of two, he would be at a loss. Lowering her head and looking at the floor, the girl replied that she was still young and had studied, so she could handle any task. The man responded with contempt, asking if she really thought that he, the eldest son of the Valdemars, needed the help of an impudent girl who was the daughter of a servant. Then he grinned evilly again and said that since she would do everything, he threw her some kind of bottle. Kneeling, she looked at the bottle that lay in her hands. And Mr. Achenhouse explained that in a week, Ezekiel would return to Clarice, and she needed to give him this to drink. At that moment, the girl remembered the rumors that were circulating in the north that Valdemar's eldest son was afraid of losing his right to inheritance because of his younger brother, who had returned from the war as a hero and harbored hatred towards him. She lowered her head and said that she couldn't do it, to which the man asked again, "Wasn't it she who said that she would do everything?" Approaching the girl, the gentleman added that she should not be mistaken and should not think that after hearing everything, he would leave her alive. From the moment when this bottle was thrown to her, she had no choice. Leaning over the maid, the man said that if she valued her life so much, then she should not have come to him at all, and everything would have simply ended with the death of her parents. Mr. Achenhouse grinned and clarified that this was not a proposal, but an order from a strong one. And then, smiling condescendingly, the man offered the girl to make a choice. He explained that she had to choose whether to die alone or three. Closing her eyes, still kneeling, the girl realized that she had no choice. She silently pressed the vial of poison to her chest, and Mr. Achenhouse noticed that she had made the right choice. Then he told the men that since she had become an accomplice, he would ask her name. Opening her eyes, the girl answered in a trembling voice that her name was Rose. The man laughed and remarked that her parents truly valued their daughter, since they gave her a name that was not appropriate for her status. Laughing, he added that since she was in love and affection, he realized that it was a happy family, and then added that the name was very noticeable, and it should be changed. Looking at the girl, the man decided that the new name should be similar to her real one, and decided that from now on she would be called Rose. Leaning towards Rose and taking her by the chin, Mr. Achenhouse saw that up close she was very pretty. Afterwards, he asked her if she was a virgin, but the girl just looked at him silently in response. But seeing her look, the man realized that this was true, and added that it was a pity, because with virgins there is a lot of fuss, and it takes a long time to teach everything. Running his hand through Rose's hair, he said that if he had time, he would drag her into bed today. And then, pressing her head to his shoulder, he asked her not to forget that the lives of her parents were in his hands. Then Mr. Achenhouse added that he expected good news from her in a week. The setting sun illuminated the city, where cries were heard that the royal army was coming, and also that Major Valdemara had arrived. Sitting on his horse, the man rode through the streets of the city with a smile, and the people called him the hero of Asturias. The maids in the house where the major arrived were discussing that the master was so tired that he immediately went to his room. They understood that he had spent a lot of time on the battlefield and decided to make sure that no one disturbed his rest. Rose, her lips pressed together, listened as the girls talked about how the gentleman would now be able to live peacefully in the main house. After this, the girl approached the man's room, quietly opened the door, and looked inside. Entering it and approaching the gentleman, she looked at him with despair in her eyes. The girl couldn't believe that she saw him so close, and she also realized that he was very tired, since he didn't notice how she entered the room. Looking at the man, Rose noticed that he did not look like his older brother at all, because he had tanned skin and a strong build. Opening the bottle, the girl remembered that the banner of his detachment was black, and the exploits of the 37th Regiment where he served were known throughout the Kingdom of Asturias. Under a bloody black banner, they rushed into the most brutal battles and were even called the King's Army. This was the most valiant unit, bringing victory in battles, and Ezekiel Valdemera was their best shooter, the most formidable hand of the detachment. And the life of this hero, the kingdom of Asturias, was now in her hands. Frightened, pressing the bottle to her chest, the girl thought how good it would be if he woke up now. On the other hand, I understood with horror what would have happened if this had really happened. As Rose shifted her feet near her master's bed, she realized that all of this was wrong, and yet she suddenly realized that she couldn't do it. Suddenly she heard a noise and turning around saw a gun falling from the cupboard. She watched in fear as it fell to the floor, realizing that it could fire now. At that moment, Mr. Ezekiel woke up from his sleep and instantly realized what was happening. Sitting up in bed, he grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her towards him. At that moment, the gun went off and Rose realized that she had almost been hit by a bullet. The man, looking at the girl who was standing next to him in fear, asked if she was okay. Rose realized with horror that if this continued, she would have to explain how she had secretly snuck in here and why she was holding the bottle in her hands. And also, on whose orders and why did she come here, and as soon as the truth comes out, everything will be over. She understood that she had to run, otherwise her parents would die. These thoughts made the girl very scared, her eyes opened wide. Rose suddenly splashed whatever was in the bottle into Mr. Ezekiel's face, and then, hugging him to her chest, she quickly ran out of the room. She ran down the corridor, dreaming of getting as far away from here as quickly as possible. She felt very guilty and regretted that the bullet had not hit her because he had saved her, and she, in gratitude, had done what she had done. Sometime later, Rose sat hidden in the closet, covered with a blanket. Her parents entered and, approaching their daughter, were glad that she was safe. They said that Mr. Ackenhouse seemed to be satisfied and let them go, and people say that his brother completely lost his sight. The parents worriedly told him that they had started looking for a criminal in Waldemar's house and that they needed to leave Clarice as soon as possible. They added that they were paid for this work and no longer had to worry about paying for their studies, so their daughter should return to school. After that, the girl packed her things and, standing with a suitcase in her hands, listened to her parents say goodbye to her and say that they would meet after graduation. Rose was unusually sad and melancholy at that moment. After all, the girl only now realized what she had done, and her parents knew everything about it. There were medicines on the table, and voices nearby were discussing how the chimney had collapsed at school, and the students were probably scared. Rose, while caring for the child, heard the teachers discussing how fortunate it was that everyone had escaped with minor injuries and colds, since the doctors in the north were very busy. The man explained that in Delos there is the Waldemar estate and that all the doctors are called there. They say that all the windows there are covered with black curtains, the lights are out, and at night some kind of groans can be heard. There are strange rumors circulating among doctors, and the estate has been given the nickname the Beast's Lair. That day, Rose, like a possessed person, headed to Delos, and there he was. The girl did not understand what it was, atonement or hypocrisy. But she had no doubt about one thing: a person cannot escape from the sin he has committed and will never find freedom. After starting work at the estate, Rose noticed a lot of empty wine bottles, and so one day, I drew the attention of the senior maid to this. She asked if the gentleman had really drunk it all by himself. Mrs. Selva answered positively and added that before, he had not touched alcohol, constantly saying that a military man cannot get drunk. But after he lost his sight, he became a completely different person. The girl was surprised that it was really possible to drink so much, and the senior maid explained that in fact it was impossible, but it was impossible to stop him. That's how he copes with excruciating pain. They say that the gentleman, from the pain in his eyes, as if he was losing his mind, sometimes tried to scratch out his own eyes, but his subordinates rushed to stop him. The woman said that at first the gentleman could not sleep at all, but now he somehow calms down, thanks to alcohol and Rose. Rose remembered that Rosinam was a strong sedative and painkiller, but recently it had been used a lot in the war, and most likely it was difficult to find on the market. Miss Selva added that this medicine has been difficult to obtain lately, to which Rose responded that now that the war is over, supplies may gradually resume. The senior maid responded by saying that even after the war, many soldiers suffer from the consequences. Even the master, with his alcohol supplies, only manages to get a few bottles. She complained that no matter how much money she offered, she couldn't get it, and other medications didn't help. Rose didn't respond to this, she just lowered her head. The girl thought that this was a man who couldn't last a day without alcohol and medicine, walking around the first floor of the estate with an unperturbed look, as if no one would understand anything. At that moment she realized that Mr. Ezekiel had not yet completely lost himself, had not yet given up. So Rose decided that she too should try her best. Looking at the white bandage in her hands, she remembered that she had come to this estate to become its eyes, hands, and feet. The girl decided that she would atone for her sin, even if she had to give her life for it. As Rose tied the blindfold, she decided that she had to take responsibility and protect him. So, with a blindfold on, the girl walked along the corridor, holding onto the wall with her hand, and the darkness of the first floor constrained her movements. With every step in the blind unknown, fear dug under the skin. Now Rose understood the value of the gentleman's efforts. She assumed that he had probably passed through these rooms hundreds of times. Running her hand along the wall, the girl became convinced that this was the only way to remember the exact layout of the floor. At some point, Rose smelled the cloying smell of alcohol and the bitterness of medicine. Suddenly the girl collided with someone. She realized that it was the gentleman, having felt the smell and a strong, trained body. Brushing aside the interruption, the man sternly asked who was there and ordered him to state his name. From the push, the girl fell to the floor and screamed in pain and surprise. And the gentleman asked if Selva hadn't warned her that there shouldn't be any disturbances on the first floor. Lifting the bandage, the girl replied that she had heard about it and asked the man for forgiveness. Mistress Selva, who appeared behind the gentleman, asked in surprise what Rose was doing there, and he, hearing the girl's name, noticed that this was the same servant who burst into the chambers without permission. The senior maid confirmed that they already knew each other and added that she was the new maid from the laundry. Approaching the girl, Mrs. Selva asked why she was blindfolded, to which she replied that she wanted to feel what the gentleman was feeling in order to better understand how to help him. With a grin, the man asked if it was really necessary to blind herself for this, and then added that her job was to wash clothes and let her go and get to work. He also wondered if the maid, by copying him, was mocking him, or if it was pity. With a smile, Ms. Selva told Lord Ezekiel that Rose, a kind and diligent girl, and a woman she believed meant well. To this the man replied that there was no need to blindfold him, it was enough to simply stay out of the way. The girl apologized and promised to be more careful. When she bowed, the gentleman passed by her, telling her to know her place. Accompanied by Lady Selva, Lord Ezekiel walked further down the dark corridor. Rose, holding the removed bandage in her hands, watched them go and remained silent. Some time later, the girl returned to the laundry room and began washing clothes. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her arm and realized that she had most likely pulled a muscle when she fell. Sadly, Rose knew she couldn't let them throw her out, so she had to pull herself together and not give up. At that moment, the door to the laundry room suddenly opened, and a maid named Anna ran into the room. Calling Rose by name, she threw herself on her neck with tears in her eyes. And then she said that it was just a nightmare out there, and the gentleman usually doesn't get so angry. He had just had dinner in the dining room, and everything seemed to be in its place. But when the gentleman reached for the wine, it turned out that it was in the wrong place. And so he missed, and the glass of wine fell, and everything spilled. Mrs. Selva was surprised that this happened, and Anna was simply very scared. The man exclaimed in anger that they were of no use, and asked if it was really so difficult to put things back in place. Afterwards, Anna added that he ended up turning the table over, scattering everything, and now Madame Selva is calling Rose to bring a towel and take away the dirty clothes. When the maid added that she had come here for the good salary and not to be tormented like this, the girl thought that the master was in a bad mood because of their meeting, and she felt uneasy. She took a towel and told Anna that she would go, and she, putting her head on the table, replied that she would rest a little before returning to the dining room. Along the dark corridors, the girl, holding a towel in her hands, walked to the master's room. When she reached the door, she knocked and said it was Rose and she had brought a clean towel. When the girl entered, Madame Selva asked her to come closer. The senior maid asked her to help the master change his clothes, as she had no strength left at all. After that, the girl went behind the screen where the man was now standing. Seeing him, the girl's eyes opened wide in surprise. After all, when the gentleman took off his shirt, she saw his back, on which there were terrible scars. Holding his shirt, Rose thought that no one would have thought that he would end up like this. Looking at the body of Mr. Ezekiel, which was all in grams, the girl understood that no one knew what was hidden behind his brilliant triumph. As the second son of the Waldemar family, he became a major at a young age and was always at the forefront. And until the very end, he bore the heavy burden of war for the honor of his family. With her head down, the girl thought that he had survived, in spite of everything, and this was how he was thanked. She did not understand what to do and how to atone for this sin. After the girl helped the gentleman with changing clothes, Madame Selva thanked her. Rose replied that there was no need for thanks, especially since Madame was nearby, so it was much easier for her to help him. And she added that she most likely would not have been able to cope alone, to which the senior maid replied that most likely it would have been so, but with her, Mr. Ezekiel was always courteous. And then, unexpectedly, Madame Selva admitted that sometimes she felt helpless because her hour was near. And if she dies, then Mr. Ezekiel will need someone to take care of him. Someone he can trust, who will always be there, and someone who will understand him completely, the woman added, standing in front of the closed door. Looking at the sad Madame Selva, the girl mentally agreed with her. After all, if Lord Akanaus becomes the head of the family, then Lord Ezekiel will have no one to protect him. Rose imagined a man standing blindfolded, surrounded by people who had turned their backs on him. Madame Selva, looking seriously at the girl, added that a loyal vassal was not so important. Looking at Rose, she thought that the master needed the mistress of this house, and if the other maids were frightened by his disposition, then the girl was different. At this time, Rose, looking at the senior maid, asked if she wanted to say something. When the woman wanted to ask the girl for something, a cry was heard in the corridor that called her. It was Anna who, giving the letter, explained that the messenger who brought it said that it was for the master and asked him to give it to her. Taking the letter in her hands, the senior servant realized that it was a letter that they had been waiting for a long time. Looking back at Rose, the woman suddenly asked if she was curious about what it said. Having received no answer, Madame Selva called the girl with her, forcing her to think about what was actually written there. Upon hearing about the letter, Mr. Ezekiel said that there was only one person from whom he was waiting to hear, and then he asked what was in it, and when he didn't receive an answer, he asked why Selva was silent. After apologizing, the woman explained that everything was swimming before her eyes, and she could not make out what was written, and she would have to look for someone who could read it. At this time, Rose said that the letter was from Captain Montcalm. Hearing this, the man asked in surprise if she could read. When the girl replied that she had learned it at school, Madame Selva was very surprised, and Rose added that she had never finished it. Then the senior maid, noticing that this was unusual, asked what she had studied, to which the girl replied that she had studied poetry, literature, composition, as well as history, geometry, and even algebra, so that she could handle accounting without difficulty. Mr. Ezekiel, hearing this, asked if she had attended school, then why was she now vegetating on odd jobs? Rose replied that she did not consider washing to be just menial work, but believed that preparing clothes for him every day was noble work. Madame Selva remarked that washing and cooking were both worthy occupations, but she became curious as to why she, Rose, was dragging out a miserable existence in this wilderness, although she would undoubtedly have found a better place in the city. The girl was very confused by this question from the senior maid. She realized that both Mr. and Madame Selva suspected her. Looking at the gentleman, Rose understood that the gentleman had come all this way to avoid strife with his brother, and, having lost his sight, had become completely defenseless, so he saw a threat in every stranger. But the girl, even if she hadn't deprived him of his sight, would still have come here in the end, no matter what the cost. Because, more than anything in the world, she wanted to work here. Turning to the gentleman of vocation, the girl asked if he by any chance remembered the Melena Academy for girls in Sielce, in the north. The man, lost in thought, asked Rose again the name of the academy. Standing before the master, the girl, bowing her head, explained that she was there, a student. She clearly remembered that terrible day, towards the end of the Wars of the Roses, when David's counterattack forced the Asturian army to retreat and the flames of war, in the blink of an eye, engulfed Kielce. The students of the Melena Academy found themselves trapped, unable to leave the school building. All they could do was lock the doors and pray. The girl remembered how one of the students came running screaming that something terrible had happened, namely that the Asturian army had retreated. In horror, opening her eyes, the girl did not understand why, because just yesterday they clearly saw their camp. When the girls went out onto the balcony, they realized that they had disappeared, as if they had never been there, and behind the hills only David's troops were visible, camped. Panic broke out among the girls. They did not understand what to do, and were afraid that they would all be taken prisoner. Imagining the future, the girls understood that they would either be killed or given over to the soldiers for entertainment. They started crying because they didn't want this. Someone started asking to go home to their mommy, and now all the students were crying. At this time, Rose found the strength to pull herself together and asked the girls to calm down. She asked them to hang white sheets and curtains from the windows, and the girl tried to convince the others that if they surrendered, the enemies would spare their lives. She asked the girls not to lose hope, although she mentally understood that these were empty words to calm the frightened children. Men went to the battlefield as soldiers, while the women who remained at home ended up in the hands of the enemy, losing their lives. Clenching her hands into fists, the girl could not hide from herself the tragic truth of the war. She knew that resistance was useless. However, a miracle happened unexpectedly. They all saw a black flag, and then the girls realized that it was Major Waldemara, and they had come to save them. Just when everyone had given up hope and despair, they appeared. Soldiers riding on black horses, waving a black flag, a symbol of victory. They were known among the many troops as the Royal Army, chosen warriors who carried out only special missions, the invincible 37th Regiment. And the hero who commanded this regiment and created this reputation was Ezekiel Valdemara. Watching the young officer command the battlefield, raising the black flag of victory, they knew they were not abandoned. The 37th Regiment and Ezekiel, they will never leave the weak, and they did not leave them. Thus, the Melena Girls' Academy was saved by the Royal Army. After their victory at Cielsa, they took advantage of their momentum to move further north, and the girls strewed the school grounds with roses as a sign of gratitude. Red rose petals danced with the regiment's black flag. Among them, Rose saw a man with a large build, and even from a distance she knew it was Major Valdemara. The girl looked at him with wide eyes, waiting for him to come closer, and then she threw the pose she was holding in her hands right at him as the man drove by. Rose didn't expect Major Ezekiel Valdemara to catch her rose, and then he looks at her, immediately determining who threw him the flower. Then the man brought the rose to his face and, inhaling its scent, smiled dreamily. Rose could not forget that day and prayed with all her heart that all the glory and blessings of the world would accompany him in the future. But this prayer dissipated into emptiness, like a rose that blooms only for a moment. Having told all this, Rose thought that now she was praying like a sinner, knowing that her prayers would not be heard. She didn't care whether they would forgive her or not. She just wanted the man to live. That's all she asked for, and did with all her heart. These two were once linked by fate in the Asturian War. A man of noble birth who was blinded by a vile plot and forced to flee to distant lands. And the woman whose life he saved during the war, who wants to repay that debt. She thought that all she could do was devote herself to him, which is why she went to him. The relationship that was supposed to end in misunderstanding is starting to change again. Perhaps this is fate itself, Madame Selva thought. Looking at the girl, Madame could not believe that such a connection could exist, and that this story was truly wonderful. The headmaid realized that the reason Rose worked so hard was because she wanted to repay her benefactor. The girl at that moment thought that even though he had saved her life twice, she had ultimately paid him for this kindness with betrayal. Madame Selva turned to Lord Ezekiel and offered to make Rose his personal servant. The woman added that the girl was smart, honest, and well-educated, so she would be much more useful than an old woman like her, and if she shared the work with her, it would be good for her too. The man, propping his head up with his hand, replied in a slightly thoughtful tone that Madame Selva should do as she wished. Having received permission, the senior maid decided that from that day on, Rose would be Lord Ezekiel's personal maid. The woman said that she would give Rose a room next to the master, and also assign someone else to the laundry, and she also needed to inform the others not to take you on cleaning duties. Having handed the letter into the girl's hands, Madame Selva added that she would not give her any other work, as she needed to focus solely on Lord Ezekiel. After this, the senior maid, saying that she was counting on Rose, left the room, closing the door behind her. The girl, holding the letter in her hands, looked at the closed door, very surprised by the events that had taken place. Glancing sideways at the man, she thought that Madame Selva had left them alone in the room. At this time, Mr. Ezekiel extended his hand and asked Rose to give him the letter, because first the seal needed to be checked. Taking it from the girl's hands, the man asked her to call him Major, as before. Opening the seal, the Major realized that the letter had definitely been sent by Montcalm, and said that this meant that this was the search report he had requested. Rose, hearing about the search, thought that it was about the maid who blinded the man. At that moment, he asked to read the letter. It stated that, at the Major's request, a beautiful woman with brown eyes and chestnut hair, who appeared to be no more than 20, had not yet been found. Moncam secretly contacted the servants of the main house and, after investigating, learned that on that day, an unknown woman of the appropriate description entered the kitchen to help. Since she was a beautiful newcomer, she made an impression, but her whereabouts are unknown. The servants believe that she caught the eye of Lord Akanos and was taken into his service. Rose fell silent. The man, realizing this, asked what had happened and asked her to continue, to which the girl replied that she had caught her breath for a moment and apologized. She continued reading about how this kind of thing happened frequently in the mansion, and they would focus their investigation on the women his brother had been in contact with recently, and that was where the report ended. The major responded that everything was clear to him and that it coincided with the information he had received earlier. And when the man said that the girl could definitely attract Akanaos's attention, Rose became scared, because at this rate they could follow her all the way to Delosa. The girl began to read the postscript, which stated that they would send him rosemary through an army doctor, but they were warned that the dosage was at a dangerous level and asked to consult a doctor about this. Hearing this, Mr. Ezekiel noticed that at the end, Moncam wrote a very boring thing and grumbled like his mother, after which he asked the girl to give him the letter. When he took the letter from Rose's hands, he noticed that her hands were very cold. The man remembered the day when she came to close the window at night and he pushed her onto the bed. And I realized that then her whole body was very cold, like ice. Although the man could not see the expression on her face at that moment, he was quite able to imagine how she looked and felt. Because the women and children he saw on the battlefields most likely looked exactly like her. He then felt so sorry for them that he immediately forbade his detachment from looting and violence. The major, feeling sad, realized that he had ultimately done such a terrible thing to this girl. When she said she would stay there and work, the man assumed she was probably in dire need of money, but when she called him Major, he realized that this was not the case. Mr. Ezekiel sat in his chair with his head down, deep in thought. Clenching his hand into a fist, the man realized that it was strange, but the title seemed to be a comfort to him. Even though it was the first time the girl called him that, Ezekiel found the moment painfully nostalgic, although maybe she had called him that before. Having thought about this, the major asked how old the girl was, to which he heard that she was 19 years old. Hearing Rose's answer, the man thought for a moment, putting his hand to his chin, and the girl at that moment became frightened because the gentleman could suspect that she was a criminal. But the major, turning his head towards the girl, suddenly asked if she really couldn't finish school at 19 years old. Rose explained that she was admitted late and also had a problem with paying for her studies, but she was a good student. The man added sadly that he was sorry that she was unable to complete her studies and was forced to work in such a place. Hearing these words, the girl looked at the sitting gentleman in surprise, and then she replied that she had no regrets about it. Rose lowered her head and repeated it again with all her confidence. Having put the letter on the table, the major suddenly asked what she looked like, because if she was a student, he should remember her, because his eyesight was excellent. He added that Madame Selva had described her as beautiful and kind, to which Rose had replied that she had an ordinary face. Mr. Ezekiel decided that he needed to confirm this then. The man rose from his chair and stood directly in front of the girl, and then with his hand he carefully touched her face. With slow movements of his hand, he outlined the oval of her face and ran his finger along her nose. The man's touch made the girl feel ticklish and she closed her eyes. Then Ezekiel gently ran his hand through Rose's hair. The man accidentally touched the bun and realized that it had fallen apart, but the girl replied that everything was fine. Then he continued to run his hand through his hair, picking up a single lock of hair in his hand. After this, the man noticed that she had rather long hair and asked what color it was. Rose, taking her hair in her hand, did not know how to answer the major about the color of her hair. And what if she tells him they are brown? Maybe then he will ask about the color of her eyes. She remembered the report that described a maid, about 20 years old with brown hair, and if the major found out that she matched all the descriptions, would he leave everything as it was? Rose froze, the thought flashing through her head that she had finally been given a chance to atone for her guilt by being next to him. And also, the fact that she was finally able to talk to him normally. And then the girl remembered Madame Selva's words that if she hadn't had red hair, she might have suspected her. Rose lowered her head and wondered how to tell him about the color of her hair. And having come to a certain decision, the girl, smiling, answered that her hair was red. Hearing this, the major assumed that the girl had green eyes, and she confirmed this, to which the man remarked that now he understood why her name was Rose. Standing opposite Lord Ezekiel, the girl realized that the irreversible lie had begun. The next morning, Anna met Rose with a sparkle in her eyes and said that she looked wonderful. The girl, in a chic dress, asked if it didn't look strange on her, to which she received a negative answer. The other maids were also amazed at how beautiful Rose was, and Anna added that she always knew her place was not in the laundry. She added that knowing the owner's character, she was a little worried about the girl, but she was sure that she could handle it. The embarrassed Rose thanked Anna for her support. The first thing Madame Selva did was to tidy up Rose's appearance, because even in a mansion lost in a remote corner of the country, she is the personal maid of the Waldemar family. Having become Ezekiel's personal maid, the girl realized how modest a life he led. In this mansion where day and night merged into one, he lived more orderly than anyone else. Although the major drowned himself in alcohol, every day, at a certain time, he walked through the corridors for exercises. He ate on schedule, went to bed early and got up before dawn. While changing the bed linen and straightening the bed, the girl wondered why this was happening. And then she suggested that perhaps the soldier's habits were still making themselves felt. The scars covering his body looked like war wounds. He has difficulty sleeping and wakes up from the slightest noise, so he never gets enough sleep. Madame Selva asked the girl to remember this, giving her a recipe for tea that helps the major sleep. Rose was glad that he trusted her, but at the same time, the man did not trust even the smallest matters related to him to other servants. The girl thought sadly that this was not surprising, because only after returning from the battlefield, Ezekiel faced a terrible tragedy that divided his life into before and after, so even here he cannot feel calm and does not trust anyone. Spending all her time in the laundry, Rose did not know much and often had to rely on others. One of the maids told her where the herbs and alcohol were kept and advised her that if she was unsure about anything, she should call her. One day, the girl heard that a new doctor was due to arrive soon and remembered that sometimes once every few weeks, or a few days, a doctor came, but all the servants were afraid of these visits. The maids discussed how these days the master's mood was getting worse. He was drinking more alcohol and taking drugs and becoming terribly irritable. They believed that Lord Ezekiel's eyes could not be cured anyway, and that it was a waste of money, and while it was a profit for the doctors, it was a complete nuisance for them. One day the doctor arrived and said in a trembling voice that it was an honor for him to meet the hero of the War of the Roses, and that he would do everything to cure him. When the man began to explain that he had studied pharmacology in the West, Lord Ezekiel simply asked him to begin. Having asked permission to examine the major's eyes, the doctor lit a lamp. Seeing this, Rose asked him to stop, since the use of lamps here was prohibited. The surprised doctor replied that he could not conduct an examination without light. Suddenly, Lord Ezekiel said that everything was fine. It was just that his maid, like a soldier's servant, was adamant, and added that he should not pay attention to her and do whatever was necessary. Having placed the lamp on the table, the doctor raised his hands to the man's eyes and began the examination. At this time, Rose thought that the light, even to her, seemed blinding and was worried whether the major would be able to bear it. The girl knew that the man was in pain, even in the moonlight and at night, and he had to hold the curtains tightly just to wipe it away. She looked at Mr. Ezekiel and saw how the doctor carefully examined his eyes with the help of a special device. Rose saw beads of sweat running down the man's chin from the strain, and his hands tightly gripped the armrest of the chair on which he sat. Seeing all this, Rose realized that the man was experiencing incredible pain. The shocked girl did not understand why this happened. Placing her hands on the major's hand, she did not understand why the one who committed the sin and the one who suffers from it were different people. The girl sat on her knees near the chair and held his hand with hers, as if trying to take away the pain. Rose closed her eyes and thought that she should have been experiencing this pain. The lamp was still burning brightly, standing on the table. The doctor, having finished the examination, was packing his things into a suitcase by the light of a lamp. Covering his face with his hand, the major asked how long the doctor was going to remain silent and asked him not to beat around the bush, but to tell him the diagnosis. Without turning around, the man answered Lord Ezekiel that there was not the slightest chance that his sight could be restored. At that moment, Rose thought that her master had endured so much pain for the sake of this examination, but in the end, there was no chance that his vision could be restored. And then, unexpectedly, the girl realized something and her eyes widened. Rose was horrified because she had just realized that she had been relieved that the man's sight would not return. From the very beginning, she had not considered the possibility of healing and had come to be his hands and feet. She came to atone for her sin, and if there had been a chance for healing, she would not have come to this mansion. At that moment, the major asked whether there were several doctors here or only the same one came. After all, every time he hears the same answer, and this makes him want to kill them right now. Remembering his brother and the woman who blinded him, he really wanted to kill them, but he didn't know how to do it. In a rage, he shouted that he had gone over hundreds of ways to finish them off in his head, millions of times. The doctor, thinking that this was said to him, fell to the floor and, frightened, asked to spare him. Cursing, Lord Ezekiel rose from his chair and walked decisively towards the exit. When Rose called him, he, without looking back, ordered her to bring him a drink. The girl, not knowing how to help the man, simply stood and watched him go. In the dark office, a voice was heard that said that nothing had worked out again, but he would not give up. Madame Selva, who listened to the words, said that there are many doctors in the world, and surely there would be at least one who could cure his eyes. Smiling at Rose, the woman added that the next doctor was very famous. He advertised his skills everywhere, and she hoped that he would definitely help. Lower your head. The girl understood what it means. Everything still exists, next times. Remembering his hand that was clutching the armrest of the chair, Rose thought that the major would suffer like this forever. At this time, Madame Selva, saying that the gentleman was most likely now lying intoxicated with alcohol and medicine, sent the girl to pick up the medicine and give it to her. Approaching the door, Rose stopped, heavy thoughts visiting her head. Reaching out for the door handle, the girl thought that she was deceiving the major. After all, she is one of those whom he hates so much and whose death he wishes. She hid the fact that she is that very woman. Rose considered herself a coward and a hypocrite who thought only about her own salvation, because she felt relieved when the doctor said that there was no chance of recovery. Mentally, the girl asked herself whether she was worthy of being his servant. Thinking that she had no right to stay near him, she looked into the room and saw that the man was not sleeping. But the appearance of Mr. Ezekiel shocked her, causing her eyes to open wide. The major sat in a chair, bent over at the knees and covering his mouth with his hand. Rose carefully approached him and asked if he was okay, as the man had drunk a large amount of alcohol and medication that day. But Lord Ezekiel did not respond to her words, but only suddenly shouted that the offensive must be stopped. The girl was frightened by this scream, and then in horror she realized what was happening. And the major continued to sit and tell Montcalm about the undergrowth that had grown, and also the fact that there was an ideal area for an ambush. Lowering her head, Rose called him again, by rank. But the man seemed not to hear her. He was there, on the battlefield, talking to Montcalm, visible only to him, about the need to abandon hope. With a confident look, the major explained to someone invisible the strategy for the upcoming battle, and at that very moment, the girl who was looking and trying to call the man understood everything, namely that the side effects of Rosanoma can be so terrifying. The gray sky, without the slightest ray of sunshine, seemed to envelop the gloomy mansion of Waldemar. Rose, sitting at the table opposite Madame Selva, was saying that hallucinating was not normal. The girl added with concern that at this rate, it could become life-threatening, and that all alcohol and medications should be thrown out. Madame Selva, hearing these words of the girl, thought for a moment, and then she asked if anyone else had seen Lord Ezekiel in such a state, to which she received a negative answer. Upon learning this, the woman added that as long as the other servants remained in the dark, everything was fine. And as long as unnecessary rumors are not spread, there will be no problems. Upon hearing this, Rose asked the woman in surprise what was going on. She said, to this, the senior maid said that they needed a way to ease the Lord's suffering, because if he could no longer bear the pain, he would eventually harm himself or take it out on others. And after this, the woman added, no one will want to work here anymore and everyone will run away. With bitterness, Madame Selva added, did Rose really think that an old woman like her could take care of the Lord alone? In the end, nothing changed. The doctor's visits continued throughout the winter. Each time after their visit, the major drowned himself in alcohol and drugs and again suffered from hallucinations. The girl, while collecting and taking out empty bottles from their rooms, often listened to the gentleman talking to someone. Sitting on the bed and looking unseeingly, the man was back at war and apologizing to Montcalm. The girl, observing all this, remembered that she had told Madame Selva everything, but it had had no effect. Rose, seeing how the gentleman commanded an invisible army, asked herself if everything would really continue like this. She wondered if it could be called life that he, clinging to what was stolen, while his consciousness was fading, relying on past glory, would be high in order to survive. At that moment, the girl wondered if it would have been better if the major had simply given up. Rose thought that if the man stopped seeking treatment and no longer called doctors, then at least he would be able to cut down on alcohol and drugs. One such gray, gloomy day, a carriage pulled up to the mansion. She brought a man who introduced himself as Dr. Bremen, a sort of father of medicine. Lord Ezekiel, not wanting to waste time on long bows and scrapes, asked him to begin the inspection. The man turned on the lamp, but unlike the others, he covered it with a cloth, and then, taking out a magnifying glass, began to examine it. Rose, at this time, as on previous occasions, was sitting on her knees near the chair and holding his hand. Watching the doctor, the girl realized that this examination took quite a long time. Rose saw the veins in the major's neck bulge with tension and pain. When the doctor finished the examination, the man groaned and covered his eyes with his hand. The doctor, at that moment, looked closely at Lord Ezekiel and asked if he was in pain. To this, the man honestly replied that he felt like his head was about to turn into liquid and that he also felt sick. After thinking for a moment, the doctor replied that he thought that the suffering the major was experiencing was a good sign. When asked why, the doctor explained that a completely dead body cannot feel pain. And then, adjusting his glasses, the man, saying that this is precisely why he believes it is not too late, asked the major how many poisons he knows. He added that there are too many of them to count, and there are also some that I mix together. Looking at the Lord, the doctor said that identifying the poison is not so easy, and if the research is not careful, it could worsen the situation. Hearing these words, Lord Ezekiel shouted out that he didn't care about caution. The doctor, not expecting such a reaction from the man, looked at him in surprise, and the major, who was already tired of the pain, added that he didn't care and asked to just do it. Hearing this, the doctor, thinking that his intentions had been misinterpreted, explained that the major's eyes could get much worse. Lord Ezekiel slammed his fist on the arm of his chair in anger and shouted at him to shut up. He added that there was no need for empty chatter and that the doctor simply needed to do what he said, because things couldn't get any worse than they were now. The major, bending over, added in despair that it would have been better if they had simply killed him, and he would not have had to hate them. At least in the end he would have been honored and remembered as a great soldier. The man said that the woman had poisoned him instead and told them to see what had happened to him. The Lord screamed furiously that she had left him. In this broken body, he was neither truly alive nor dead. And also, the major didn't care that the treatment might not work. He no longer cared what would happen to him, and even if he went completely blind, at least the pain would stop. Gritting his teeth, the man added that the woman should have gouged out his eyes from the very beginning. Having said this, the man reached for his eyes, but Rose grabbed his shoulder. Grabbing his hand, she tried to stop Lord Ezekiel, and he screamed at her to let him go. Pressing his head to her chest and wrapping her arms around him, Rose whispered that she wouldn't let go. The girl asked him not to give up, and he responded by shouting that she didn't understand the situation he was in. The major shouted that everyone was saying that he couldn't be cured, but at the same time they wouldn't let him gouge out his eyes, and all he could do was sit here in silence and endure this pain. Trying to push Rose away, he added bitterly that he knew his future, and everyone except Selva would escape from here, and when she died, then he could calmly gouge out her eyes. The major understood that the end was always the same, and if he knew the outcome, then why should he drag it out? Then he added that he had already decided to end it and asked why she was stopping him. Hearing these words, the girl wondered for a moment what was going on in his head. Every time he met with the doctor, again and again, his hope was reborn only to collapse. Every time he had to give up a piece of his hope, Rose even caught herself thinking that it was incredible because he never gave up. But now the girl understood that this was not so. It was just that the major, who bore all his despair alone, ever since he came to Madame Selva, had been haunted by the vision of being abandoned. Lord Ezekiel had lost his sight, was cut off from people, fenced off from the world, and now Rose understood that the man in front of her had nothing left, and he had lost the meaning of life. She didn't understand how to help him not lose hope, how one could endure such agony every day and continue to live without breaking down. And then Rose realized that there was only one thing left for the major to do now. Taking the man's face in her hands, the girl asked him who he thought would be the happiest if he lost his sight completely. The major thought for a moment and then quietly said his brother's name, Akanaus. And then he added that it was also the woman who poisoned him. Smiling, Rose agreed with him and said that they were waiting for him to remain until he destroyed himself, and if he did that, then they would achieve their goal. Gently running her hand over the man's cheek, the girl asked if it wouldn't be better to take revenge on them instead. Hearing these words, Mr. Ezekiel agreed that she was right. The man added that he couldn't afford it. I would just give them up. He had to drag them away with him. After this, the major turned to Dr. Bremen and asked what his unfinished method was. The doctor explained that this was an attempt to administer all known antidotes, but the risk of deterioration was quite high, so it was essentially an experiment on a human. After listening to him, Mr. Ezekiel said that he liked everything and that he should try it. Rose, hearing this, exclaimed that it was very dangerous and asked the man to think about everything before making a decision. Smiling and running his hand through her hair, the major asked the girl if she was worried. And then, adding confidence to his smile, he added that she would soon see for herself that Major Waldemara never loses a battle. The doctor then explained in detail how the experiment would be carried out, and added that it could not be carried out under the influence of other drugs. Therefore, the major must stop drinking alcohol and the medications he is currently taking. Looking at Lord Ezekiel and how easily he agreed, the girl remembered his strong dependence. Rose was also happy because this way he would be able to cut down on his alcohol and drug consumption. At this time, Dr. Bremen, holding a rose in his hands, said that it is very difficult to refuse this drug. He added that if there are already signs of delirium, then it means there is already a very serious addiction. And if the major continues to take it in such quantities, he will soon lose his cognitive functions and then his life. With these words, he really scared the girl. She could no longer stand silently and addressed Dr. Bremen by name. And then Rose asked him if he was sure that a drug with such side effects could be called a medicine at all. Looking at the young lady, the doctor asked what she thought could be called a medicine. He added that with the right method and dosage, mercury can treat syphilis and arsenic, anthrax. The doctor explained that depending on how it is used, anything can be either poison or medicine. Looking at the girl, the man added that from the doctor's point of view, the line that separates them is extremely thin. The doctor added that in the case of the major, with such a strong addiction, as soon as he stopped taking them, he would face all sorts of suffering. And this suffering will be enormous. He will have to endure pain many times worse than anything he has experienced so far. And then, turning to the major, he asked if he had enough courage to face such agony. It had only been a few days since the man stopped taking alcohol and medication. The major dropped to one knee and slammed his fist on the floor, swore and said he couldn't stand it. Clutching his head with his hands, he screamed that he couldn't control himself and wanted to take medicine. Then he called Rose and ordered her to bring a rope and tie him up. The girl, looking at her lord, realized that, as Dr. Bremen had warned, terrible side effects had begun. One day Rose heard strange sounds coming from the room and opened the door there in alarm. What the girl saw there shocked her to the depths of her soul. An invisible wave seemed to swallow Lord Ezekiel. Despite the strong addiction, the doctor called this process a terrible temptation, and for the major, it was the beginning of hell. At first, his nerves were so tense that he found it difficult to keep his mind. Although the man had no intention of taking the medicine, before he could come to his senses, his hand seemed to have reached out to him on its own, he told the girl. But Rose reassured him, explaining that it was just regular water and he could drink it, and she also explained that she had gotten rid of all the medications and alcohol. The next symptom was cold sweat that permeated his entire body. Then came a pain that seemed to tear his whole body apart, and the man, trying to relieve it, beat against the wall, and the girl asked him to hold on and watched so that he did not hurt himself. But Ezekiel no longer understood what he was doing, and pushed Rose away. The girl involuntarily received blows that left bruises on her body. Finally, the major's body, which had been burning from the high temperature, was now shaking with chills, causing him to tremble violently, and it seemed to him at that time that he was going crazy. Rose, seeing how Mr. Ezekiel was shaking, brought another blanket. The girl heard him whisper that he was afraid of this cold, but it didn't matter. He still wouldn't give up, and she called him and asked him to cover himself with a blanket. Rose thought with alarm that no matter how strong his will was, a person usually couldn't bear something like that, and the major had also suffered for months without being able to sleep. Suddenly, the man grabbed Rose's hand and said that he needed warmth. Sitting up and hugging the girl, he buried his face in her stomach, whispering that the cold was causing him pain. At that moment, Rose felt that Ezekiel's body was icy and decided to warm him with her body. To begin with, the girl decided to take off the major's clothes, which were soaked in sweat. After apologizing, she said that she would take off his clothes and added that she did not mean anything strange and that he, as an officer, should understand this. Still not letting go of the girl, the man suddenly shouted for her to give him the medicine. He felt so bad that he begged Rose for medicine, but the girl simply stroked his back. At that moment, it was dark for him, as if he was drowning in this darkness. The Major didn't know when, but at some point he became accustomed to seeing this sight. The man felt only suffering. It seemed to him that all his feelings were getting out of control. He felt this pain spreading throughout his entire body. Every bit of suffering crashed down on him like a tidal wave, and the man didn't know when he would finally feel better. But this endless darkness in him told him that he was still alive. The Major knew that he was slowly falling apart, but he couldn't stop taking medication and drinking alcohol. After all, he knew that as soon as he stopped drinking it, memories from the past would come flooding back. And at that moment, he will see what he so strongly wanted to forget. The hell that he experienced again and again will begin to haunt him like a shadow, as if reminding him of who he used to be, Major Ezekiel Waldemera. And then, into his such an ordinary world, that woman burst in. The Major sees her, and in just a few seconds he realizes that she is the cause of all these nightmares. He remembers that she has chestnut hair and hazel eyes that sparkle with an olive light, and also a confused face and slightly parted lips. The more a man is intoxicated by the medicine, the clearer the image becomes, and the only way not to forget this woman is to take Rosemary. The Major thought it was very ironic that even the face of the one they loved might not come to mind so often when they were far apart. Many times the man repeated that he would not allow himself to forget the face of that woman. After applying the medicine to her forehead, he asked her if she really thought she could escape from him. Lying in bed with Rose, delirious, he talked about how he would not forgive that woman. And then the Major, without coming to his senses, tightly squeezed the girl's waist, pressing himself against the body that exuded warmth. And he shouted that he would not forgive them and would kill them with his own hands. The man, without realizing what he was doing, pressed himself against the girl's chest. And she, realizing that he was talking about her, suddenly told him to do it. Hugging the Major tightly, Rose added that he could do whatever he wanted with her. The next day, Madame Selva, sitting opposite the girl, said that she was prepared for the Lord to begin to suffer greatly, but did not expect it to last so long. Rose, holding a cup of tea, replied that she too had thought that it would be 3-4 days. The woman suggested that the girl find additional staff, as it was difficult for her to cope alone. Taking Rose's hand in hers, she looked at the bruises on her arms and said that they looked very painful and that she should immediately prepare several assistants. The girl refused this because she had already told what and how happens behind closed doors. Remembering how she had warmed the man with her body, Rose explained that there were some delicate issues. She added that the Major had become very sensitive and asked to be allowed to continue doing this work. Rose explained that they only needed to prepare food and water outside the room and change towels and clothes once a day. Lowering her head, the girl added that eternal night would never come. No matter how severe his suffering would be, the sun would definitely rise in the morning. Rose said that the Major cannot sleep normally and even eats with difficulty, and a room filled only with suffering can seem to him like a new battlefield. And then the girl placed her hands on top of Madame Selva's hands. With enthusiasm, she said that they must help the Major, end this battle and get him out of the room safely. Madame Selva and Anna stood in front of the door to the Major's room. They brought food. Rose, from behind the door, asked to leave it there. The maid was very surprised that the girl was there. And then she asked how the gentleman was doing, since it was already the 3rd day, and whether it was dangerous to continue. At that moment, Madame Selva thought that she had not known that it would take so long, and hoped that the morning would be without incident for both of them. At that moment, Rose flew to the floor from being pushed by the Major. After cursing, the man asked the girl not to approach him while he was being violent, otherwise she might get hurt. To this, Rose, sitting on the floor, replied that she would share her fate with him, and if he harmed himself, she would do the same. Hearing these words, the Major clenched his fist and asked again what she had said. And then the man decided that he would try to control himself, but he didn't promise that it would work. A whole week has passed since Lord Ezekiel gave up alcohol and drugs. He endured all the suffering with amazing fortitude, and the girl, watching him sleep, thought that perhaps her selfless care had helped because his rage had completely subsided. However, new symptoms appeared and pain overtook him almost every day. When Rose saw that he had started scratching himself and remarked that if he continued like this, blood would flow, the Major replied that there were bugs crawling all over his body. Putting her hand on his shoulder, the girl explained that these were hallucinations and a symptom of severe itching, and that there were no bugs on his body. The man, continuing to scratch his skin, angrily shouted that they were definitely running all over him because he could feel them. The major recalled that when he visited the graves of wounded soldiers, he saw maggots running all over their bodies. This terrible sight remained forever in Lord Ezekiel's memory. The girl, looking down sadly, said nothing, and then offered to wipe his body. And already running a damp cloth over his skin, she added that if there really were bugs on him, she would be afraid to touch his body. The man turned his head away and silently accepted Rose's help, acknowledging that she was right. After this, the girl asked the major to wait a little so that she could apply the healing ointment to his body. Suddenly, Lord Ezekiel grabbed Rose's hand with a sharp movement, and then, leaning towards her hand, he sniffed, which greatly surprised Rose. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he touched her palm with his tongue. The major raised his head and said that he could smell blood, which meant she had an open wound and needed to take care of it. Confused and slightly scared, Rose said she would do as he said, but he needed to let her go. The man asked the girl not to worry about him, since he had gone to the front with minor wounds, and his recovery was quick. Unexpectedly, the major said that if she was there, he would be able to endure everything and asked Rose to always be by his side. Hearing these words, the girl lowered her head. Her look became sad, but she replied that she understood. A dark, gloomy sky seemed to surround Lord Waldemar's mansion on all sides. In the room, on the bed, sat a girl, her head resting on her knees. The major was sleeping. Opening his eyes, the man thought he had fallen asleep without noticing it. At that moment, he felt the girl's hand, which gently ran through her hair. Suddenly, through the darkness that had already become familiar, he saw a red color and was surprised by it. Taking it in his hand, he realized that it was hair. Its bright color was Rose's own. At this time, the girl asked if he was okay and added that he would definitely get better soon. She continued to talk about how, over time, all of this would become just a memory. And the major, suddenly seeing a vague silhouette and hearing a calm voice, thought that it was Rose. But then the man thought that it was just a dream, and his reality was darkness. The major closed his eyes, thinking about what he had just seen. So, lying on the girl's lap, he felt her presence. The sound of the rain, her sigh, the gentle warmth, all of it enveloped the man. Deciding that he wanted to see her face, the major reached out his hand towards it, thinking that since it was a dream, he needed to see her face. Running his fingers over it, the man thought that there was nothing special about it. Correct features, small, thin lips, the skin became rougher than before. At this time, the girl, taking Ezekiel's hand in hers, asked if he was itching. To this, the man replied that he felt much better, and also noticed that it had become quiet. Holding Rose's hand, the major added that for a moment it seemed to him that he saw her beautiful hair, the color of a rose. He said that they were beautiful, like the sky he looked at in the morning after the battle was over. The major explained that at that moment, a magical dawn had broken, and in that dawn, there was a silence that only the survivors could feel. Covered in blood, sweat, and tears, Lord Ezekiel was exhausted, unaware of such darkness on the ground. The major admitted that that was his last beautiful sunrise. Outside the window, the sun was rising, making this world a little more beautiful, and the major kissed the girl. At that moment, Rose remembered how one of the girls at the academy asked what kind of woman Major Ezekiel would marry. Other students discussed that his bride must be from a noble family, perhaps he already had an arranged marriage, and also that marrying a major was prestigious. One of the girls noticed that the man lived in another world and asked the others not to get carried away by their dreams. To this, the girl with short hair replied that she was not going to ask him to marry her and that one night would be enough for her, after which she would remember her for the rest of her life. She also said that if she worked at Waldemar's estate, she would try to attract his attention, but there were already a lot of maids there, and it would be difficult to get in there. At this moment, one of the girls asked Rose what she would do, because with her beautiful eyes, the major might notice her. To this, Rose replied that it was not funny at all to tease her like that. The other girls started asking if it was true that when he saved their school, her heart didn't tremble, and then they asked if Rose didn't want to kiss the major, to which she asked them not to say that. All these memories flashed through her head while the major kissed her. Suddenly, the man lifted his head from the girl's lap and sat up. And then, looking at her, he reached out to kiss her again, at which time Rose thought that she had never imagined that a kiss could be like this. She also never thought that the day would come when she would kiss someone, and that person would be the major. The girl was in a very difficult situation, but she did not regret what happened. The only thing was, she didn't understand what would happen to her now. Because if everything went on like this, he would give up the drug, he would be cured, and his vision would return to him. But as soon as the Major sees her face, he will remember the woman who blinded him. And then he will squeeze her neck tightly, because there is no hope for forgiveness. Finally, after the spring rains for which the damp northern lands were famous, the sky cleared. And then the bedroom door opened and the heavy tension that had filled the mansion melted away like snow. All the servants ran along the corridors, checking whether the curtains were closed, because the owner had left. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and the cooks were glad that they could cook for him again. They felt the spring filling the air, and when Madame Selva heard Ezekiel leave the room and ask for a bath, tears began to flow from her eyes. Wiping them with a handkerchief, the woman told Rose that she had done a very good job. To this, the girl noted that the Major had not yet fully recovered and still needed rest. Madame Selva replied that it was all thanks to the girl staying by his side, and added that not everyone could have done that. The woman thought that this connection was wonderful, because Major Ezekiel saved her school, and she came here. Madame Selva thought that the two of them must be connected by a special thread of fate. At that moment they heard Lord Ezekiel calling for Rose, and the woman told her to come to him. Entering the bathroom, the girl asked what had happened and asked if he needed anything. A man sitting in the bathtub asked the girl to come closer. When Rose approached, the Major suddenly told her to sit in the bath, to which the girl asked him not to worry, because she would bathe later. To this the man remarked that it was too late to feign embarrassment, since she had already undressed him. The girl, embarrassed, noted that if anyone had heard his words, they would have understood everything incorrectly. When the Major noticed that Rose was bolder in the bedroom, she asked him not to tease her. The man reached for the girl's hand and asked if the reason was that she was disgusted to look at him. Rose's eyes widened and she answered no, because that was not true at all. Raising her hand to his lips, the man asked if she really thought he could do something to her. Rose, hearing this, looked at the man in surprise and asked what he could do, and he, kissing the girl's hand, said that this was only his assumption. And then he added that if she didn't shave, she would take a bath with him. In the end, the girl agreed, and the Major, sitting next to her, suddenly said that until recently, she was a woman who did not exist in his world, and if not for that accident, he would never have met her. He added that Rose appeared as a gift from above, and life is so unpredictable and full of nothing but surprises. Smiling, the man asked the girl if she came here for him. Rose closed her eyes and answered positively, adding that she had come to see him. Remembering Achaeus, she mentally said that she came here not only with good intentions, she could not live with the burden of guilt for what she had done. She was a sinner, and she could not forget the crime she had committed. The man, sensing that Rose was moving away, hugged her and asked her not to run away from him. And then he asked her to always be by his side, to which the girl realized that she could not leave him because she had no right to do so. After they had taken a bath and were already standing in their robes, the Major, taking Rose's hair in his hand, said that she smelled like flowers. The girl replied that it was the smell of the bath salts she used. To this the man retorted that her scent seemed very sweet and suggested that it was because her name was Rose. And then the Major invited the girl to go with him to the bedroom. She smiled and replied that she would serve him. But suddenly, her eyes opened wide and she realized what the man had asked her. The embarrassed girl timidly pulled him by the sleeve and agreed. When Rose was already lying on the bed, the Major suddenly said that he was angry that he couldn't see her. What kind of hair and eyes does she have? Like fresh greenery or a dense forest? He noticed that he didn't know what her nose looked like, and when he touched her face with his hand, he couldn't grasp its shape. To this, Rose replied that her appearance might disappoint him and asked him not to introduce her as a beauty. The man, however, noted with a smile that he was not interested in her appearance, but in her herself. He added that he wanted to feel her with all 5 senses. Hear her voice, feel her skin, and if that wasn't enough, he would inhale her scent, taste her. In the end, the girl still crossed the line and they became one, and even knowing that it was a sin, she still decided to do it. The next morning, Rose sat across from Madame Selva with her head down, and the woman told her not to make that face. After all, the senior servant knew that Ezekiel would like her, and she expected that this might happen. Upon hearing this, Rose replied that this would not be a problem that the woman would have to worry about. Taking the girl's hands in hers, Madame Selva asked her not to speak like that. And then she added with a smile that if Rose fell in love, she should take responsibility for it. Madame Selva, looking seriously at the girl, suddenly said that she wanted her to stay with Lord Ezekiel and protect this estate. She understood that this would not happen right away, but first, the woman wanted Rose to learn about the estate and how to manage the servants. Looking down, the girl thought that in this secluded house, she was the only one who was on his side, and decided that there was no point in imagining anything unnecessary. Therefore, Rose replied that she was just a maid, and he was a member of the Waldemar family. To which Madame Selva remarked that sooner or later this was bound to happen, for everything was visible on Lord Ezekiel's face. Suddenly they heard the Major call Rose to come to him. Madame Selva, having said that she would, as before, count on the girl to look after him, got ready to leave. But suddenly she turned around and added that a letter had arrived for Lord Ezekiel and she could not give it to him earlier. When the woman gave the letter to the girl, she saw that the sender was Montcalm. The Major was in the bath again and asked her to join him. Sitting in it, the man noticed that the girl was thinking about something else. To this, the girl, embarrassed, replied that she was just thinking. After the bath, in the bedroom, Rose helped the Major get dressed, and while putting on his shirt, the man noticed that from now on, he could handle it himself. Hearing this, the girl did not answer, but simply let go of her hands so as not to interfere. Looking at Lord Ezekiel's body, the girl thought that it was all covered with countless scars and decided that he had faced danger many times. Her eyes became sad, because Rose realized that the fact that he was alive was nothing less than a miracle. The girl remembered how the maids had said that the Major's body was disfigured by scars and that he couldn't see properly, which meant that he had no hope of a normal life. And some servants also recalled, smiling, that the man had been expelled from the prestigious Waldemar family. Rose heard them talking about how it didn't matter that the Major was a war hero because his past glory wouldn't help him now. Having thought about all this, the girl resolutely helped him button the top button on his shirt. And then she asked how the Major had received such terrible wounds and suggested that he must have encountered something terribly dangerous. To this, the man said that he served in a unit that was always sent on dangerous missions, and death was their constant companion. The Major also added that, in addition to this, a reward was placed on his head at that time. Lord Ezekiel thought about it and said that it made planning operations easier, since all he had to do was use himself as bait. Rose couldn't understand how he could talk about something so terrifying so calmly, and she wondered out loud if he really had come up with such reckless strategies. Hugging the girl and pressing himself against her stomach, the Major replied that in war it is never safe. To this, Rose said that he once said that he did not enter into a fight that he could not lose, and the Major replied that if he had lost, he would not be here now. Smiling, the girl agreed with him, because he was right. If the man had lost, he might not be alive. Looking at Lord Ezekiel, Rose wondered what would become of her from this moment on. At this time, the man remembered the letter that Madame Selva had given him and asked to read it. The man lay down on the bed and took Rose's hand, who was sitting next to him and reading about what Montcalm was reporting on the investigation, which he carried out on the orders of Lord Ezekiel about the woman who blinded him. Montcalm has discovered who Akanaus's mistresses really are, but none of those he has recently met match her description. So he shifted his investigation to looking into the recent unrest at Waldemar's estate. It seems the loyal couple, who had served the family for a long time, suddenly disappeared. They were apparently arrested on suspicion of jewel theft, but what happened after that is unclear. Since this couple was middle-aged, their features do not match those of the woman, and the time of disappearance also does not match, but there are details that do not quite match to exclude them from the suspects. Montcalm wrote that in such cases, the punishment is carried out and the result is made public as a warning. And yet, the couple disappeared without a trace, and Akanaus is not one to show mercy. He wrote that there must have been a secret restraining order because no matter how many times he asked, not a single person wanted to tell the truth. The girl read that this is why Montcalm went to the house where the couple lived, but at the same time she became more and more afraid. Rose continued reading about how the door to the house was locked and the lights were off, and it didn't look like anyone was living in the house. When he entered, it looked as if they had escaped in the middle of the night. However, it was unclear whether they had been caught or had managed to escape. The Major, sitting up in bed on hearing this, said that he would write a reply to Montcalm, and then he asked Rose if she knew how deep the loyalty of those who served the Waldemar family ran. The Major explained that his great-grandfather always said that the fastest way to get people to do what you want is with money, so their family never skimped on their servants. And if that couple stole the jewelry despite this, it means they had serious expenses. The man told the girl to write down so that Montcalm could carefully find out that Akanaus had not passed anything, namely, what kind of lifestyle the couple led and what they looked like, and if they had debts, how much exactly they owed. The major added that at the end it should be written that Montcalm is investigating this, then he will need to report everything. The girl, having listened to all this, answered positively and prepared to write a reply. Rose wrote a reply to Montcalm, and the major sat next to her, resting his head on her shoulder. Rose, remembering that the servants kept their mouths shut, realized that this was some kind of trick by Akanaus to protect himself. Her hand was shaking, but the girl continued to write, wondering what would happen if Montcalm intervened. She understood that he would soon find out that the missing couple had a daughter, and that the daughter's appearance matched the description of the criminal. And so, the girl realized that it was a matter of time before he realized that she looked exactly like that woman. At that moment, the girl noticed that the major turned his head in her direction and looked at her. She was very afraid of what he would do when he found out the truth, but she continued writing the letter. And also, the girl decided that perhaps she would not be able to stay here for long. The next morning, Rose came into the kitchen and, after greeting Anna, asked if they had any lemons left. The surprised maid replied that of course they were there and asked why the girl needed them. To this, Rose replied that she wanted to make lemon tea. Anna, having found lemons, put 3 of them in a cup and asked if that was enough, to which Rose answered positively. With these lemons, the girl went out into the corridor and quietly closed the door to the kitchen. She knew it wasn't easy to get pregnant, and she'd heard something at the girls' academy, namely, that Akanaus used lemons to prevent the birth of illegitimate children. Walking quietly down the hallway, Rose hoped it would work for her too. After all, the girl knew how much the major hated that woman, and she could not cause Lord Ezekiel any more despair. At this time, the major's voice was heard in the office, asking Madame Selva how much capital they could use in this estate. To this, the woman replied that although this was not the main estate of Valdemar, they had enough money to live comfortably, with staff. She added that the annual funds they receive remain untouched, and the antiques and jewelry should also fetch a significant amount if sold. Hearing this, Lord Ezekiel told Madame Selva that he wanted to secretly acquire another estate. These words surprised the woman, and the man added that the estate should be small. Slightly embarrassed, the major suddenly said that Rose was not one of those who liked extravagant things. He thought that for someone as modest as she was, a small, cozy residence that could be seen at a glance would be best suited. The major imagined that they would leave this gloomy mansion and live there, just the 2 of them, and no one would disturb them. If they can live every day just by looking at each other, his life will become brighter. The man imagined them sitting together on the sofa, him reading a book and glancing at her. And then he thought that if they could become one whole, then that would be enough for his life to become complete. And the major also imagined little legs running across the carpet towards him. And I thought that it would be good if they had a child together. The major imagined a little girl with red hair and blue eyes and thought that, unlike him, who had lived his life for the sake of his family, the family she would build would be different. One he couldn't have imagined without her by his side. The man understood that this might still be a long way off, but he was already looking forward to it. Lord Ezekiel continued to tell Madame Selva that a 1-story house would be ideal for raising 1 or 2 children. The major added that this villa was dangerous, since Akanaus knew about it, although he had now gone quiet, but not for long. Madame Selva pointed out that it would be best to turn the furniture, art objects, and jewelry into cash in advance. The man agreed and added that they needed to prepare the place for departure, namely, to leave for a new estate which no one knows about. Madame Selva thought for a moment, and then said that Rose did not care much about her appearance, and she suggested selling women's jewelry and then buying women's things, although if they could do without selling them, it would be for the better. The major told the woman that she should not worry about living expenses, because he would receive a pension from the royal army. Madame Selva agreed with him and added that, after all, he was the hero of Asturias. For some time they discussed which region to choose and decided that the west would be best. It is not far from David, there is a port there and it is rich in supplies. The major also added that Montcalm and Fidel were also from the west, so they could rely on them in case of danger. Madame Selva, listening to the man who spoke so confidently, agreed with him. And then, Lord Ezekiel suddenly asked the woman to make sure that Rose didn't know anything about it. Smiling kindly, Madame Selva said that she would do everything as he said. At this time, the man thought that someday, with his own eyes, he wanted to see the future that they shared together. Rose walked down the corridor, holding a tray with a teapot and a cup on it. She was thoughtful and hoped that this tea was drinkable since the lemons were not yet ripe, and she added honey to the tea. When the girl approached Lord Ezekiel's room, she heard him tell her to come in. Rose was surprised and asked how the major knew it was her, to which he replied that he recognized her footsteps. Closing his eyes, the man added that she walked easily, without lowering her heels, perhaps because her body was light. The surprised girl realized that with such heightened senses, it was no wonder that he could move around the mansion as if he could see. She wondered how well the major could get to know her, and if he could even see parts of her that she didn't know about. At that moment, the girl took a quiet step forward, also holding a tray in her hands, and then she walked past Lord Ezekiel, which caused him surprise. The man smiled at this and then approached the girl. At this time, Rose was holding a cup of tea in her hands and, sniffing it, the man noticed that the aroma was very refreshing. The girl replied that it was lemon tea and it helps with insomnia. She asked to drink it every day, to which the man asked if it would excite his mind. Rose replied that this might only be the case at first, but that it would relax him later. The man, holding the cup in his hands, noted that it would rather stir him up. The girl replied that if this did not help, she would make another tea and added that she made this tea herself. The man raised the cup to his mouth with a sharp movement and began to drink. Rose, seeing this, asked him to drink more slowly so as not to burn himself. Putting the empty cup on the table, the man asked if she really thought he would sit and leisurely drink tea at midnight. Gently running his hand over the girl's face, the major noticed that she was overestimating him. Confused by his actions, Rose decided to change the subject and asked how the tea tasted. Lord Ezekiel did not answer this question but only smiled, and then, putting his arm around the girl's waist, he abruptly pulled her towards him. The man kissed Rose and then asked her how the tea tasted. The lowered girl replied that he was sweet, to which the major remarked that he was as sweet as she was. Having let down Rose's hair, the man added that he had been waiting all day for the night to come, when no one would be able to disturb them. He remembered that during the day, while sitting in his office, he said that the people in this place were completely reckless. The major asked Madame Selva since when this mansion had ceased to function without Rose and why she was being dumped with minor tasks all day long. The senior maid was very surprised by her master's words, and he, slamming his hand on the armrest of the chair, added that the girl had even been given the burden of household chores. He confessed to Madame Selva that this really irritated him. To this, Madame Selva replied that without rules, everyone gets lost, which surprised the gentleman. To this, the woman explained that until now, the major's life had been monotonous and orderly. But once he decided to stop taking the medicine, they had no idea how the man spent his days. So all they could do was wait outside the master's bedroom door, relying on Rose's judgment and direction to divide the work. She described how the girl would periodically come out of the bedroom and tell them what they needed to do. Lord Ezekiel ran his hand through his hair and cursed. He understood everything. But Madame Selva, smiling, added that he shouldn't worry, and in a few days everything would settle down. Also, if Rose becomes the mistress of this house, she will have to take command someday, so this is a great opportunity to learn. Lord Ezekiel sighed heavily and replied to Madame Selva that he understood everything. He added that if his sight never returned, Rose would be the one who would keep the house in order. Leaning his head against the girl's, he asked her to let him borrow her for the rest of the night when her workday was over. He added that he had put her through unnecessary trouble because the cure for his insomnia was right there. Hugging the girl, the major said that all he needed was her, and the girl, at that moment, remembered that Lord Akanaus had given her this name on a whim. Closing her eyes, she realized that every time a man called her Rose, she wanted only one thing. Looking at the man, she realized that she wanted the name Rose to be her real name. Continuing to look at the major, the girl thought bitterly how nice it would be if she really had red hair and green eyes. Running her hand over the man's cheek, she thought that if that were the case, then right now, she could let her heart flutter at his voice. Having kissed the major, the girl realized that then she could present her face to him as he wished and would allow him to touch her without hesitation. Looking at the man's face, and without taking her hand from his cheek, she realized that all this would have been possible if she had not been the one who blinded him. Lying on the bed, the girl understood that everything would have been like this if she had simply fallen in love with him and come here with a pure heart. As she hugged the man, she wondered if she could imagine a different future for them. At that moment, Lord Ezekiel looked at the girl and said that she had no idea how long he had waited for her workday to end. At that moment, Rose realized that the lemon she had put inside could be felt a little. Suddenly, unexpectedly, Lord Ezekiel asked the girl to say that she needed him too. Hearing these words, Rose's eyes opened wide in surprise, and the Major continued to talk about how she was a gift that appeared like a miracle just when he needed her. Taking a lock of her hair in his hand, the man noted that although Selva said that they had a special connection, he knew nothing about the girl. The Major also added that he was sure that if it weren't for the letter, he would never have found out anything about her. That is why the man wanted to know as much as possible about Rose. He wondered what would have happened if the girl had reciprocated his feelings back then. And also, if this had happened, what future would have awaited them. He would also like to know what her favorite subject was at school, or what dreams the girl had after finishing school. The Major would like to know if Rose was born with the habit of saying she was fine, showing her fortitude, or at what age she would like to get married. Still holding a lock of Rose's hair, the man asked if she couldn't have appeared before him earlier. Placing his hand on the girl's cheek, the Major said that even when she was next to him, he wanted to ask her, for someone like him, who could not see anything, whether she was the deepest night. In the silence of the room, the man asked Rose why she wasn't answering, whether she didn't need him. Placing her hand on the man's hand, the girl said that he had asked such an obvious question. Looking the Major in the eye, Rose replied that she needed him too. The man, sitting next to the girl, asked again whether she really considered his question obvious, to which he received a positive answer. And then, looking closely at Rose, he disagreed with her. Sitting down next to him, the girl looked at the man in surprise and asked why this was not so. To this, the Major replied that she should think about the sacrifices she had made and about who was truly in despair, he or she. And then he thoughtfully continued about what would have happened if they had met much earlier. That is, before he lost his sight and assumed it would be much better this way. The Major added that he fled to this remote estate simply to save his life. The man also added that he was no longer as rich as he had been when he was a member of the Waldemar family and lived in Claris. Turning his face towards the girl, the Major said that he was not the knight or gentleman she had hoped for. He added that he killed many people on the battlefield and even treated her terribly. With bitterness, the man said that he was completely different from such kind and pure people as she. And then, taking Rose by the hand, the Major promised something to the girl. Running his hand over her cheek, the man added that he was only Valdemara by name, and in his current state he might seem unreliable. Leaning his forehead against Rose's, the Major said that even so, for her safety, he would give everything, since he was the one who ruined everything. Hearing these words, the girl's face became sad and she looked away. After all, Rose believed that she was one of those who had ruined his life and had come here to pay for the sin she had committed, and it would be too cruel to force the Major to protect someone like her. At that moment, Lord Ezekiel felt that the girl had become distant and asked her what had happened and whether she really didn't trust him. Lowering her head and pressing her hands to her chest, Rose answered the question in the negative. And then the girl added that the man's words were too generous, and she was happy just to be with him. Unexpectedly hugging the girl, the Major suddenly said that he didn't know why, but his heart was pounding wildly. The man added that he had always had a purpose in life, joining the army to mend Valdemiro and going to the battlefield to defend Asturias. In the darkness of the room, the Major's voice was heard, saying that one day he lost everything. Putting his arm around the girl's waist, the man added that he was very lost, and his world no longer shone as brightly and was not as wide as before. Having said that he had now found a new meaning in life and that it was Rose, the Major kissed the girl. Looking at Ezekiel, the girl wondered why, of all the possible options, they had to meet like this. And also, it would be great if there was a way to turn everything back, then she would completely trust him, without any hesitation. A tear began to flow from her closed eyes, because Rose understood that the sin she carried, the regrets that could not be undone, the secret she must keep until death, were connected to him, and it was too great a burden. Feeling tears on the girl's cheeks, the Major asked if she was really crying. Looking at the man, Rose replied that she was not the woman he imagined. Holding his hands on the girl's cheeks, the Major asked what kind of woman she considered worthy. Closing her eyes, the girl replied that the woman who could become a major had the strength. Smiling, the man replied that she was exactly that kind of woman. At this, the girl, looking at him with wide-open eyes, noted that she did not think that she could be of any use to him. Holding Rose to his chest, the Major replied that all he needed was her feelings, as they were at that moment. On the table stood a cup of empty tea, with a slice of lemon inside. Rose lay on the bed next to the Major, whose eyes were closed, thinking. She thought that if these feelings were love, then how reckless her first love must have been. Suddenly the man put his hand on the girl's cheek, which surprised her, and the major asked if he had woken Rose up and made her look at him. To this, the girl answered negatively, and then asked if he couldn't sleep either. The man, hearing the alarm in Rose's voice, replied that this was not so, and if he closed his eyes, he would immediately fall asleep. This answer surprised the girl, and she asked why he wasn't sleeping then. To this, the man replied that listening to her breathing, everything suddenly began to seem strange to him. The major suddenly realized that he no longer needed alcohol or medicine, and the pain had completely subsided, and he had not felt so calm for a long time. Rose, hearing this, was glad that Ezekiel was much better. At this point, the girl wondered if it was time to write to Dr. Brimman, and she herself mentally understood that the time had finally come. Time to find out if the light will return to his eyes. Placing her trembling hand on his chest, Rose wondered what she would do if this really happened. The major felt a tremor, took her hand in his, and asked what had happened and if she was scared. To this, Rose answered positively and mentally thought that she was afraid that the major would regain his sight, or that he would remain blind forever. The man, hearing this, suddenly said that he was not afraid, and he was so excited that he could not wait. And then the major added that he would prove to her that Major Waldemara never loses a battle. He admitted that when he regains his sight, the first thing he wants to do is see the girl's face. The next morning, Rose stood with Anna and asked her who the new man was, to which she replied that he was delivering groceries. The girl looked at the man who was talking to the maid and asked if the merchants for the mansion had not yet been selected. To this, Anna replied that from now on, he would deliver fresh fruit, and since Rose loved fruit, this was ideal. Anna also looked at the girl and noticed that the owner had become kinder lately. She said that the other day the cook used salt instead of sugar, but instead of getting angry, the Lord told him to redo it, although before he would have exploded with anger and turned the table over. Anna added that all this was thanks to Rose, which surprised her greatly. Suddenly, Anna asked if she could continue to be so sweet with her, to which she received a positive answer. The maid added that if Rose became the mistress of the house, she would be punished for disrespect, to which the saddened girl replied that this would not happen. After some time, being alone, the girl suddenly heard some sound. Turning around, she saw the man who would now be delivering the fruit, who bowed to her. Rose didn't answer, but she felt some strange feeling. She felt uneasy. On a separate level, the dark sky was slowly giving way to a new dawn. On this day, which everyone was waiting for, Dr. Bremen arrived. Before entering the major's room, he asked Rose to wait in the corridor. The girl was very surprised by these words, but did as he said. As a result, Rose, being in tension for the rest of the day, still did not understand what to do. Trembling with anxiety, she could only wait for someone to give her an answer. The girl stood in front of the door and wondered when the treatment would be finished. Suddenly the door opened slightly and a strip of light appeared through the crack. Rose asked Dr. Bremen, who had left the room, if the treatment was finished, to which he suggested that she come in and see for herself. At that moment, the girl imagined herself entering the room and seeing the major sitting with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he opens his eyes and looks straight at Rose. His gaze is stern and his lips are pressed tightly into a thin line. The girl, imagining this, froze in fear with her eyes wide open. And the man at that time said that she had been here the whole time. Standing opposite the girl, he added that she had no idea how long he had been looking for her and could not believe that she was so close, and he had not noticed it. Looking into Rose's face, the major asked if she had enjoyed deceiving the man she had handed over. The man came very close to the girl and stood next to her. And then his hands reached up to her thin neck and lay on it. Then the man began to strangle the girl, tearing out her mouth and only coughing and horror in her eyes. And when he said that it was time to pay for her sins, Rose woke up in fear. The major, who was sleeping with her, also woke up and called the girl by name. Rose looked at him with fear, because she had not yet recovered from her terrible dream. The man asked what had happened and whether she had had a nightmare. Rose still looked at the major with fear, but did not answer. Ezekiel, taking her hands in his and noticing that they were cold, asked if she had dreamed of ghosts. To this, Rose replied that she had a dream in which everything had returned to normal. She couldn't tell the man that in his dream he had regained his sight and forced her to atone for her guilt before him. And out loud the girl answered that in her dream, the major returned to his rightful place, and she to hers. Hearing this, the man asked what his rightful place was, to which the girl replied that he was the heir of the Waldemar family. The major, realizing what kind of dream Rose had had, suddenly asked if she had really dreamed that he would leave her and return to Waldemara. Rose lowered her head and answered in a quiet voice, "Yes." Ruffling his hair with his hand, the man suddenly said that he had not thought that she trusted him so little, and then he added that such a thing would never happen. Hugging Rose, the major added that if she didn't betray him first, he would never leave her. On a tree branch sat a small bird, looking into the distance. Rays of sun broke through the clouds, trying to illuminate the gloomy mansion. Lord Ezekiel sat in a chair wearing a dark shirt. Madame Selva came into his office and asked if he had called her, and then the major told her that he would like to buy a diamond and that it would be red. The woman was very surprised, because a red diamond rarely appears at auctions. The major, smiling, agreed with this and, adding that he did not mind waiting, asked that one be found for him. Madame Selva realized that this diamond was most likely needed for a proposal ring, and then she asked if Lord Ezekiel knew that such stones often have other names. She explained that the red diamond is often called a blood diamond. After all, its striking crimson shine often attracts people. Moreover, such a stone is surrounded by a lot of attention and rumors. There is also a rumor that it brings misfortune to its owner. Madame Selva added that worrying about him could bring misfortune to Rose. At this point, the major asked if she really believed in such superstitions, since most things that people do are usually accompanied by some kind of story. Madame Selva responded that for a festive occasion, a safer choice would be better, but the major disagreed with her and said that he wanted the red diamond so that Rose would never have to see such nightmares again. At this time, the girl was in the kitchen and washing lemons. Her gaze was very thoughtful, and her hands performed their usual actions. She thought about how the land was devastated by the scars of war, and the girl did not understand where the fruits could come from in the harsh northern land. These mysterious fruits were delivered to the mansion on a regular basis. And they were delivered by a man named Merlot, who, when they met, said that here they met again. Rose, at that moment, realized that there was something about him that she really didn't like. She remembered his gaze and realized that he seemed to be watching her. Turning to the man, the girl asked if he needed anything from her. To this, Merlot replied that he was surprised that such a beautiful lady could be in such a place. Rose noticed that these words were rather rude, to which the man apologized and added that she did not look like a resident of the north. And then Merlot added that he was curious about what brought her to this mansion. He also wanted to ask if Rose was her real name. Merlot added that he wanted to know more about the girl and thought that she could work somewhere with much better conditions. And then, adding that he was a merchant and had some connections, he suggested that she find another place, to which the girl responded negatively and asked him to leave. To this, Merlot asked her not to be so careful because he was not a bad person. Then, after apologizing to Rose, he left the kitchen with a smile. The girl, at that moment, decided that she needed to be more careful. Watching the merchant leave, Rose guessed he might have other intentions. In the bedroom, Lord Ezekiel sat on the bed and dried himself with a towel. Hearing Rose enter, he asked if anyone had entered his bedroom, to which she suggested that they might have been cleaning. To this, the man noted that this was different from the way they usually cleaned, and that this had been bothering him for several days. And then he suggested that it might be a thief, to which the girl replied that nothing had been stolen. The major, taking the cup from the girl's hands, noticed that today it was lemon tea again, but the girl replied that he should be careful because it was hot. After taking a sip of tea from his cup, Lord Ezekiel noticed that this lemon tea really did help with insomnia. Placing the cup on the table, the man told Rose that it really made him feel at ease, and then he added that maybe this was happening not because of the lemon tea, but thanks to her, which greatly surprised the girl. Taking a sip from her cup, Rose replied that she had done nothing. In her mind, the girl thought that the lemon tea was sweet and sour, just like her heart. At that moment, the major sat down closer to Rose and extended his hand towards her. Then he grabbed her waist and suddenly pulled her closer to him. And then he said that she gave him hope in the impenetrable darkness. The major confessed to the girl that it was because of her that he wanted to become better. The man sat next to Rose, his arms tightly around her neck, and then he said that just as she had given him hope, he wanted to give it back to her. Surprised by these words, Rose looked at the man, and he explained that he wanted to regain his sight as soon as possible. And when this happens, he will open the curtains and let the light into the room. After all, he wants to imprint the radiant image of the girl in his eyes. Rose just listened to Lord Ezekiel in silence without answering. After asking why she was silent, the major fell back onto the bed, pulling Rose along with him. Feeling her weight, the man noticed that she was getting thinner every day, and then asked if she would suddenly disappear one day like smoke. Smiling, Rose answered negatively, and the man noticed that she was melting before his eyes, and even Selva noticed that next to Rose, he looked like a beast. The major asked the girl to eat properly so that he would not look like a beast, and added that he had put aside a lot of food that she liked. Hearing this, Rose, who was lying on the man's chest, looked at the table where there was a cup of lemon tea. At that moment, the girl realized that the major meant fruit. The spring sun illuminated the tree branches on which small leaves were blossoming. Footsteps were heard in the garden, confident and calm. Merlot, reaching Rose and showing her the note, remarked that it was cruel. He explained that this note could have gone unnoticed, and that she really enjoyed playing with people in such a sophisticated way. Rose, looking seriously at the man, replied that she had found out who had entered the major's chambers, and then she added that he had come here after all, which made Merlot look at her closely. And Rose continued that all this happened after he discovered a note in the bedroom. The girl decided that she shouldn't beat around the bush and told the man about it, and then she asked whether Lord Akanaus Valdemar had sent him here. When Merlot didn't answer this question, Rose decided it was true. Saying that she had to report that there was a spy from Claris here, the girl quickly got ready to leave, but the man asked her to wait. He explained that he had come from Claris, not by the will of Akanaus, but by order of His Excellency. Hearing these words, Rose looked in surprise at Merlot, who was holding her. She remembered that in the Waldemar family, only one person held this title, namely the father of Ezekiel and Akanaus, Duke of Valdemara. Rose asked why the Duke had given such an order, to which Merlot, lowering his head, replied that any parent would worry if his son went to distant lands. Rose, looking sternly at the man, asked if that was why he had come here under the guise of a merchant. And then she asked why he was rummaging around in the major's room, to which Merlot replied that it was not part of his plan, he just wanted to understand how the major lived, and he added that it was probably an attempt to atone for guilt. The man added that His Excellency blamed himself for what happened to Lord Ezekiel. Merlot said he once heard the Duke compare his sons, calling the elder a coward and the younger the hope of the family. And these words, Akanaus involuntarily heard, gave rise to a feeling of threat in him, and in order to ensure his inheritance of the title, he resorted to such reckless actions involving a woman with a murky past. The girl listened to all this and remained silent, and the man continued that this incident caused a storm of indignation in the main family. He added that among Lord Ezekiel's subordinates, the atmosphere had become tense to the point that he had even had to dissuade them from challenging Lord Akanaus to a duel. To top it all off, bullets were whistling under the mask of the bet, and Lord Akanaus was eager for an immediate meeting with Lord Ezekiel. But fortunately, Merlot added, the Duke stopped him, and disaster was avoided. And then the man, becoming serious, added that, taking into account all the circumstances, the Duke asked me to convey something. Namely the fact that Lord Ezekiel is no longer Valdemara. These words simply shocked Rose. And Merlot, he went on, said that his feet should never again touch the soil of Claris, that he should disappear from sight, that the Duke should not see or hear of him, and that his son should live in the shadows, quietly and unnoticed. Hearing these words, the girl could not believe what she was hearing, and Merlot continued to talk about Lord Ezekiel keeping his subordinates in check. And if he does this, the Duke will provide him with the means to live comfortably, but he will be forbidden from claiming any power in the family. Also, if something happens to Akanaus, then Ezekiel will bear full responsibility. And then he added that everything said above is set out in an official document. Rose, shocked, asked if His Excellency had really decided to disown his own son. To this, Merlot replied that, unfortunately, there was no other way out, and His Excellency was first and foremost the head of the house, and only then the father and he could not afford to lose both sons. In that moment, Rose thought it was a cruel breakup announcement for a man who had fought to protect strangers and his homeland. The girl remembered how the major explained that he had joined the army to defend Waldemar and had gone to the battlefield to defend Asturias. She didn't understand why Lord Ezekiel was always rejected so coldly. Rose realized that all this was because of her and her sins. She wanted to scream at the top of her voice so that they wouldn't cause the major more pain. Rose wondered if it was fair that the efforts of good people went unrewarded while the wishes of evil people were granted. The girl thought for a moment, and then a bright thought came into her head. Then she, looking at Merlot, said that it would be, if there was a way, to heal the eyes of Lord Ezekiel. To this, the man asked if the treatment had not been unsuccessful. The girl objected, and added that there was still a chance for healing. Looking at Rose seriously, Merlot asked if she was sure about that. The girl explained that a doctor had appeared who claimed that he could eliminate the toxic effects of the poison in the major's body, and that the Lord's will was strong. She asked the man whether it was possible that the decision to expel him from the family could wait a little. When Rose received a positive answer, she asked to allow the major to undergo another course of treatment, because this way he would be able to decide his own fate, and if his vision never recovered, then she would take responsibility and receive this written receipt. And then she added that she still hoped that Lord Ezekiel's vision would be restored. The man silently looked at the girl who so confidently defended her master. At this point, Rose asked that if his vision was restored, wouldn't that be good news for His Excellency? Merlot closed his eyes and agreed to wait a little. And then he said that he knew that she was more than just a servant. To this, the girl replied that they had nothing to worry about, and if the major's vision was restored, she would leave so as not to be a burden to him. Rose shifted from foot to foot and added that if this was a promise that needed to be documented in writing, then she would do it. Merlot, smiling, replied that it was quite unexpected, but he could not understand that she was unnaturally devoid of greed. And he added that it was as if Rose knew that this day would come and was retreating in advance. The girl replied that she knew her place, and that if she had pursued goals directed against the Waldemar family, she would have found herself in trouble. Smiling, Merlot replied that it was very wise of her. The girl wanted to end the conversation and leave, but the man stopped her. He added that his story was not over yet. And didn't she wonder why he had come such a long way after seeing her note? The girl stopped and turned around, and Merlot said that when he first saw her, she promised a lemon. He added that the Northerners seemed innocent to him because they did not understand what she was doing, but he realized that it was a method of contraception that used lemon. Merlot also added, with a menacing look in his eyes, that the same method was used by someone else. Approaching the girl, he said that as the envoy of the Waldemar family, he would ask her one question officially. Rose looked at him with fear. At that moment, Merlot asked who she was. Lord Ezekiel stood in the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms folded across his chest. He thought about how Rose had been out of her mind lately. Not knowing what was gnawing at her soul, the answers had become drawn out and long, and the nights, previously warmed by the aroma of lemon tea, were now plunged into cold oblivion. The major was completely confused and would very much like to know what was behind such a sudden change. Deciding that he would have to wait a little while, the man heard Rose approaching him and smiled. The girl, seeing the major, smiled happily and invited him to go. She added that tonight the clouds were so thick that the moon seemed to have drowned in them, and also, on nights like these, you want to escape from the stuffy walls into the cool air. That's why Rose decided that they could take a walk in the garden, and the major, hearing this, replied that if it filled the girl with happiness, then everything was fine. Rose stopped next to the man and, stopping smiling, looked at him carefully, and the major, feeling something like a rope in her hands, asked what kind of thing it was. Handing the rope to the man, she explained that she had woven it from fabric, and with its help, the girl would make a path through the garden, especially for his walk. Hanging it over his shoulder, the major noticed that it was quite heavy and asked when Rose had managed to make it. The girl replied that she had made it during her lunch break from scraps of linen collected in the laundry room, because she understood that it was not easy for Lord Ezekiel in the stuffiness of the mansion. The man, hearing these words, was very surprised, realizing something. He realized that the girl, from the very beginning, wanted to help him, and he remembered the incident with the bandage. But then, the man thought she was making fun of his blindness, and that is why he was very cold and rude to the girl. Having thought all this, Lord Ezekiel extended his hand towards Rose and took her hand. And then he said that as long as he could walk hand in hand with her, it was already happiness. But Rose was preparing for the moment when she could no longer be his support. So they practiced in advance, and after asking the major to take hold of the rope, she asked him to follow her. Walking out into the garden, the man felt the fresh air and the intoxicating aroma of herbs. Closing his eyes, he heard the buzzing of insects, the iridescent twittering of birds, the breath of nature that he had almost forgotten. Stopping at one of the trees, the girl decisively tied a rope to it. Then she pulled it towards herself with force, testing the strength of the knot. Then Rose went ahead, unwinding the rope, and the major, holding on to her, followed her. The wind played with the pensive man's hair, bringing him freshness and coolness. And Rose walked confidently ahead, paving the way for the major to walk. One of the man's hands held the rope tightly, giving him a measure of confidence. The dark sky, covered by clouds, was visible through the branches of the trees. Walking behind the girl, the major suddenly said that this place was overgrown with weeds and thorns and looked more like a dense jungle than a well-kept garden. And also, the man added, that making his way through these thickets, it was as if he was returning to the time of his service as an officer. Rose, hearing this, noted that this place also brings back memories for her. While the girl was tying a rope to another tree, the man asked why, to which she replied that her school was located high in the mountains, and she had many times been through a portal in such a jungle. The major asked why she was doing it, and Rose explained that she was bringing back the younger students who were running around looking for adventure. Wanting to hear more about Rose's past, the man asked if she had always been so modest. At this, the girl laughed and told how she once, while trying to secretly make candy in the kitchen, almost started a fire. Or like at Christmas, I opened all the windows to see Santa and everyone got a terrible cold. This was unexpected for the major, and he noticed that she was a real tomboy, full of energy and mischief. The girl, suddenly becoming sad, said that the major was the first person to tell her such a thing. To this, the man replied that she did not wish anyone harm and was perhaps taking on someone else's guilt, and he also realized that she was one of those people who, with good intentions, pave the way to trouble. And Lord Ezekiel added, those mistakes were never really hers. Rose, listening to him, thought that she did not understand when this man had managed to become so kind. And the major at that time asked how she grew up with such a pure soul, and that her parents were wise and wonderful people. Deciding to change the subject, Rose approached the next tree and said that she would tie the rope there. The major asked what kind of tree it was, and received the answer that it was a tall spruce. The girl added that there was a whole spruce grove near her school, and in the winter they decorated these spruces together. She noticed that this tree was too majestic to be decorated. Pressing himself against Rose's back, the man replied that there was nothing he couldn't do, and suggested that when winter came, they would decorate it together. With hope in his voice, the major added that by that time he should be able to see again. Rose didn't answer this, but she thought to herself that she didn't know what would happen in winter. Walking further, the girl noticed a sculpture, and the major was surprised that she didn't know about it, because there are many of them here. Rose saw a statue of a couple, a man and a woman, looking into each other's eyes and thought that the first winter was over. And then she said that she remembered this place, and there was another statue further on. Then the girl tied the rope to an apricot tree. The major noticed that if she pulled the curtains back a little, she could see him from her room and suggested making apricot compote in the summer. Smiling, the man said that listening to her stories today, he realized that she finally looked like an ordinary girl and added that when summer came, they would do whatever she wanted. Rose looked at the man sadly and thought that perhaps everything would be fine, at least until the end of the summer. And if luck is on her side, then maybe she will see autumn and even winter and will be able to stay in this tender dream. Rose saw the next statue, in which a couple like them were holding hands, and then another couple, strengthened by an embrace. The girl was very surprised that there were so many statues of lovers and not a single lonely figure. The major relaxed and said, "Did she suddenly become curious about this?" The girl looked at him in surprise, not understanding the man's reaction. And he, leaning towards her face and taking her chin, admitted that he had been waiting for this question. Then the man hugged the girl, pressed his lips to hers and kissed her. The girl, leaning her hands on the major's shoulders, broke the kiss, asking him to wait. The man then asked Rose to look to the right and said that this was why the statue was placed there. The girl did not understand what Lord Ezekiel was talking about and turned her head. There she saw a statue where a man, tightly hugging a woman, was kissing her. She said with surprise that this couldn't be, to which the major asked if Rose really didn't believe him. He explained that when two people are walking in a garden full of tender feelings, the statues are placed in the garden so that they inevitably come face to face. Once they are opposite each other, they hold hands, hug, and when they reach the end, they kiss. Stroking Rose's face, the man added that it was just like they were now. The major said it was a tradition kept alive by one of the great northern families, because when the weather turns bad, there was nowhere else to go. Smiling, he added that when you want privacy, you can casually invite a lady for a walk, where a confession will naturally slip from your lips. Rose looked at the man and said she didn't know that, and the major, smiling, noted that when she asked about this, he was happy. The confused girl looked with wide eyes at the man's face, and she understood that right now she wanted to touch his lips with hers. Suddenly, Rose reached out to the major's face and touched it. Lord Ezekiel asked what had happened and whether this had not been enough. Taking the girl by the hand, the man said that it was too late to refuse and, noticing that her hands were cold, asked if she was cold. To this, Rose answered negatively and realized something again. namely that he is an aristocrat and an elegant man, bearing within himself the dignity and discipline of a soldier. They say that true sophistication is evident in every gesture, and looking at the major, the girl saw that this was true. She remembered the words of the Duke's envoy that she could not become Lady Valdemera. Unexpectedly, Rose asked the major if he had ever imagined himself as someone other than Waldemar. Hearing the girl's question, the man decisively answered no. Looking down and choosing her words, Rose asked a question that took him by surprise. The major, more than anyone else, would have regretted that he had fought in the most brutal places if he had been born into a simple family. To this, the man confidently answered in the negative and added that he would be proud of it. And then he added with a smile that if a person was born a Waldemar, he would remain one until he died. At that moment, Rose realized that for Lord Ezekiel, this was simply a given. If he had ever thought about an ordinary life, if he had even the slightest desire to leave everything and start a different life, then she would have told him about the matter that the boss had entrusted to Merlot. And then the girl decided that even small joys can become a support in life, and she will be his eyes, ears, hands, and will always be there. Imagining them collecting something, the girl mentally apologized to him. After all, she wanted to offer him to live, finding happiness, even in small things. For just a moment, the girl gave in to this selfish desire, not realizing their situation and forgetting who they really are. She remembered how Merlot asked her who she really was. Then the girl looked at him in surprise and fear. But then she angrily exclaimed that she didn't understand what Merlot was asking her about, because just recently he had talked about expelling the lord from the family, and now he doubted the people on his side. Hearing this, the Duke's messenger apologized and said that he did not mean to hurt her. He explained that since he could not find any faults in her, suspicion had awakened in him, because communication with many people in Clarissa had made him distrustful. Merlot also began to wonder if all the wonderful stories in the world were scripted, but now he realized that there are exceptions. The man went on to add that he hoped Lord Ezekiel's treatment would be successful and that he would give a written promise not to touch him. To this, Rose replied that then there was no longer any doubt, and the Duke's envoy added that he looked forward to working together. Remembering all this, Rose mentally told herself that she should not be greedy and act selfishly. When the girl thought that she had already committed so many sins, the major suddenly said that something was unpleasant for him. Surprised by his words and not understanding what the man was talking about, the girl looked at him. She thought she might have said something strange, but then the major suddenly asked how much longer she was going to call him Major. And then he added that the girl knew his name and asked her to call him Ezekiel. Embarrassed and slightly blushing from such an unexpected request, Rose looked into the man's face. And then she replied that she would call him that some other time. When the major asked why, Rose explained that she was a servant and had to observe the formalities that came with their contractual relationship. The major suddenly asked if she wanted to say that they were nothing more than a business agreement, to which the girl replied that since she was receiving a salary, it would be wrong to show special treatment to her alone. Hearing this, the major exclaimed that they needed to hurry with the treatment because there were too many things that needed to be corrected. The man added that as soon as his sight returned, he would elevate Rose to a place worthy of her. And then he said that this concerns both Akanaus and the woman who did this to him, and he decisively added that he would send them where they belong. The man exclaimed in anger that he would repay them in full for everything he had suffered, and then swore to it. Night, softly in its embrace, enveloped the mansion, which no longer seemed so gloomy. Rose, sitting on the bed where the major lay, with her head on her lap, read another letter. The girl was very thoughtful and silent. Nothing disturbed the silence in the room. After much correspondence, she understood some facts about Montcalm. Captain Montcalm was Ezekiel's shadow. He commanded the royal army, and in the absence of the major, he was an adjutant whose orders were law for the soldiers. He was Ezekiel's most trusted subordinate, known for his honesty and ruthlessness. Realizing this, Rose continued to read the letter, where Montcalm wrote that the missing couple had a daughter. The major, hearing this, concluded that the parents, having stumbled, had chased after gold, and the daughter, atoning for their sins, had made a deal with Akanaus. Rose read that neighbors whispered that they heard her name was Lizzie or Lisha. To this, the major remarked that these were simple nicknames that were pleasing to the ear. The girl read that, despite the need, the girl grew up in care and probably attended a northern boarding school. Rose then read that Montcalm suggested combing the northern region since the major was currently in the north. Looking at the girl, the man, having heard about the northern boarding house, asked Rose if any clues came to mind. To this, the girl replied that she did not know, and the man noted that besides Melena's Academy, there were other abodes of knowledge. Having hugged the girl, the major wondered who these people really were. The girl, hearing this question, looked at the man in surprise, and he explained that on the one hand, she remembers good and is ready to rush to help at the first call, and on the other hand, she is a woman who, without a twinge of conscience, sows evil. He added that even though she has a name that sounds similar to the villain's, Rose chooses a completely different path. To this, the girl replied that people are a kaleidoscope of contradictions, and it is impossible to fully understand a person. She thought to herself that she couldn't even fully understand it, and the major, hearing these words, only agreed with them. Then the girl continued reading, and then Montcalm asked who was writing his letters now. He wrote that, judging by the elegant handwriting, it did not look like Madame Selva's writing. The girl decided to skip this part. She read that there was unrest in Davis. Rumors were spreading around the city that something had happened to the major. Montcalm wrote that some high-ranking officials were unhappy with the commander's long absence and did not know how the House of Waldemar intended to explain this, and also that none of them wanted to see another commander in his place. He wrote that he would like to meet with the major and discuss business, and also asked when it would be convenient for the major. Rose's eyes widened in horror, realizing that Montcalm might come here. The major, hearing these words, was delighted and asked whether he would come, to which Rose answered positively. But the girl herself was not ready for this, because if Montcalm saw her, he might suspect something was wrong and try to find out who she really was. Rose thought with horror that it was still too early for him to come here. White clouds floated across the sky, and the sun illuminated the mansion with a spring glow. That day, Dr. Bremen came to see Lord Ezekiel. After greeting him, he noted that Rose had written that the man was recovering. The major responded that the girl was meticulous, and the doctor added that she had wonderful handwriting. The man was surprised that Rose's handwriting was really that good. To this, the doctor replied that the girl was very talented and never ceased to amaze him. The major agreed with Bremen's words and added that he knew this. He also said that he almost forgot that the treasure was valuable not only to him alone, and that it was impossible to hide such beauty from prying eyes. Dr. Bremen, thinking that the major was head over heels in love, noticed that he had perked up in both body and spirit. Lord Ezekiel replied that thanks to Rose, he had been sleeping lately, to which the doctor said that hearing this was like balm to his soul. Then the man added that now they could finally begin the real treatment. Rose, hearing these words, said that then she would wait outside. And when the girl added that they should call her if they needed anything, the major, taking her hand, asked where she was going. Rose responded that she didn't want to interfere, but the man suddenly said that she wouldn't interfere because without her, he would be helpless. The doctor thoughtfully agreed with the major, noting that the patient's peace was above all else. And Lord Ezekiel added at this time that it was only thanks to her presence that he had strength. And then, turning towards the girl, he asked her never to leave him. Rose was shocked that the major asked her to never leave him. She imagined him next to her, where the man was talking about how he had been looking for her for a very long time. Rose's eyes widened in surprise and fear. The doctor noticed this and asked if everything was okay, to which the girl replied that she was just worried. Hearing this and holding Rose's hand, the major said that he was here to heal, so she could put her worries aside. After kissing the girl's hand, the man added that she had nothing to worry about. Rose, who had not expected this, looked at Lord Ezekiel with excitement. At this time, Dr. Bremen lit a special lamp and took it in his hand. In his other hand, he held a vial of antidote and then said that he would administer it. The major froze in his chair, preparing for this action, and Rose stood behind the chair. Her hands were clenched tightly into fists, so as not to betray the excitement she was experiencing. The doctor, approaching the major, repeated once again that he would administer the antidote. At this time, Rose was thinking about how she could describe the tangle of feelings that was inside her now, whether it was guilt or anxiety. But for now she decided to whisper prayers, begging for his peace. All because the girl was not ready to appear before him now. She thought about this place, her personal judgment platform, where her sins are laid bare, and the scaffold where she awaits redemption, in endless languor, and lives again, without knowing shame, having hated the name Rose, from the first second. A little later, the girl stood in the bedroom with an envelope in her hands. At this time, the major called her and she turned around and looked at him. He asked her what she was doing since she was so quiet. To this, the girl replied that she was just about to write a reply to Commander Montcalm. Hearing this, the major asked to write to him so that he would postpone his visit to the estate for an indefinite period. He explained that if Davis was afraid of them, then they had to show that the royal army was still strong, so it was necessary to raise a company and begin military exercises. The man also added that, with scraps of information, tracking down the woman is practically impossible, so now he wants to focus on treatment. But as soon as it was over, the major added he would give the order and they would find her. Rose, hearing such undisguised determination, was very scared. But she said out loud that she would write everything as the major said, and asked if there was anything else that needed to be written. To this, Lord Ezekiel replied that that was all for now. His voice suddenly became serious, and he said that perhaps Rose did not realize how worried and confused he was right now. But the truth is that the man doesn't want to show her to anyone, so he hesitates and postpones Montcalm's visit. And although he had not yet seen her face or her handwriting, the thought that another man would see her first, would touch her with his gaze, was unbearable for Ezekiel. The girl, seeing that the Lord had covered his eyes with his hand, took the towel and said that she would put it down again. After that, Rose asked how his eyes were, to which the man replied that he didn't even know. The girl looked at him in surprise, not understanding how to interpret his words. And the major explained that if he exaggerated the pain, then she, out of the kindness of her heart, would become worried, but then he would seem weak and unreliable. On the other hand, the man added, he can say that everything is fine. And he said that then he would seem strong, but her concern might fade, so he suggested that Rose decide for herself what she would prefer. Placing her hand on the man's cheek, Rose said that she would always worry about him. Smiling, the girl added that then the anxiety would never go away and suggested that he tell her honestly if he needed it. Sitting down next to Rose, the major said that he always needed her. Pressing her hand to his cheek, the man admitted that as soon as she was near, he forgot about pain and suffering. Ezekiel gently ran his hand over the girl's chin, and at that moment she thought he was a liar. And when the major kissed her, the girl had the thought in her head that he would never forget that woman. From that day on, Dr. Bremen began visiting the estate twice a week. Immediately after the examination, Rose observed the major's reaction to the antidote. She recorded complaints, looked after him, and, at the slightest opportunity, reported on progress to Waldemar's family. One day, Madame Selva brought a letter that no one was expecting. After reading it, Rose realized that it was probably thanks to these reports that Ezekiel managed to keep his position as an officer. Meanwhile, the apricot trees began to bear fruit. First one, then another, and the summer flew by in the blink of an eye. Before the girl had time to come to her senses, autumn was already at the threshold. The wind was blowing through the girl's hair, and she was holding an apricot in her hands. Looking at him, she thought that in all this time, Ezekiel's sight had never returned. She tried to encourage the major so that he would not despair, and smiling, she added that it was not autumn yet, and they still had time. The major agreed with her, saying that summer was not over yet. Seeing that the major was on the verge of despair, the girl resolutely kissed him on the cheek. He was very surprised by this, because Rose did not often take the initiative. To this, the girl replied that she just wanted the major to forget everything bad. Lord Ezekiel gently ran his hand over the girl's cheek and then adjusted her hair. Having kissed the girl in return, the man agreed with her and added that if she helped him, he would be able to forget everything. Having kissed the girl's hand, the major promised her that he would definitely escape from this darkness. A dark night stood over the garden that was located near the mansion. Merlot and Rose met there. The man said that Lord Ezekiel had been examined by the best doctors from the estate. They assured that in case of poisoning, recovery would come quickly, as soon as the antidote took effect. The man also added that if there is no improvement, then there is no hope, to which the girl asked him to give them a little more time. Merlot nervously asked how much time was needed and how much longer they had to wait. He did not understand the girl's calmness and how she was going to resolve everything. Merlot asked her not to say that she was hiding something from him, because he stood up for Ezekiel every time he visited the main estate, and if this continued, he would also have problems. The girl lowered her eyes and replied that she was not hiding anything. In despair, Merlot said that it was simply a disaster. And then, he suddenly asked if she was hindering the gentleman's recovery. He added that as soon as he recovered, Rose would have to leave, and she didn't want that. The girl did not respond to this, but only looked sternly at the Duke's messenger. Seeing this look, the man apologized and said that he had gone too far out of concern. He added that he was being pressured from above, demanding an explanation as to why the situation was not changing despite the fulfillment of their requests. Upon hearing this, the girl clenched her fists. After all, she too was completely uneasy, but she kept all her fears deep inside herself. Sometime later, when the night became even darker, footsteps were heard in the depths of the garden. It was Rose who was walking with the major, who had a blindfold on, and he was asking if it was really necessary. To this, the girl replied that that night there was no moon, and it was pitch dark, but today the moon was bright, and it would be better for him to cover his eyes. The major did not respond to this fair remark. He quickened his pace and caught Rose in his arms, which startled her slightly. Approaching her, he gently touched the girl's ear with his lips. But suddenly Rose objected, saying that they might be seen. Smiling, the major assured the girl that there was no one there. When she said that it was not that someone was watching them, but that because of their presence no one could go out into the garden, the major kissed her. And then he said that since they were at the statue, they should kiss, but Rose objected, noting that it was the wrong statue. The bright moon shone in the sky. It illuminated the entire garden and the trees, whose leaves the wind played with. Suddenly, the major put his finger to the girl's mouth and asked her to be silent. Then the man listened carefully and tensed. And then, hearing some sound, the major turned around abruptly and asked who was there. Rose was surprised by the man's reaction and asked him what had happened. But Lord Ezekiel did not answer. He only bent down and felt the stone with his hand. Then he picked it up and, squeezing it in his hand, listened, intending to throw it towards the sound. And finally, the major understood where the sound he heard was coming from. He swung and threw the stone in the direction of the sound, hitting Merlot, who was hiding among the trees. Hearing the voice that came after the stone hit, Rose realized who it belonged to. And Merlot, crouching down and clutching the wound from the stone blow with his hands, hid. The major asked the girl to stay put, because there was someone there. At this time she thought that the Duke's messenger still suspected her of something. She also realized that if he was caught, they would find out about her connection with the main house. Looking around, the girl panicked and tried to think of something. Rose decided that if she fell, she would be able to distract the major, and with a loud scream, she fell. After helping the girl up, the man asked what had happened, to which she replied that she had tripped. When the major asked if she was in pain, Rose replied that she was fine. But Lord Ezekiel had already felt the blood on her knee. Closing his eyes, the man decisively removed the blindfold from his eyes. And then, with her help, he tightly bandaged the girl's broken knee. And then he asked Rose if she saw anyone to tell him immediately. To this, the girl replied that if there was anyone there, they had already left. Merlot, who was hiding behind the trees, froze at that moment so as not to make a sound. But the major, noticing that it could be a petty thief, said that she needed to raise the servants and comb the area. Rising to her feet and bracing herself in pain, Rose noticed that this was unnecessary. But suddenly, the girl's eyes opened wide in surprise. She looked at the major and could not utter a word. After all, there was a bright moon shining in the sky, and the man's eyes were open, and the girl asked him if it was too bright for him. Dr. Bremen examined Lord Ezekiel's eyes with a magnifying glass and asked him how he felt and what he sensed. When the major replied that he didn't feel much, the doctor remarked that after exposure to light, the fact that the pain didn't return meant that the antidote had taken effect. Hearing this, Rose looked at the doctor in surprise, and the major asked why then he still couldn't see. To this, the doctor replied that there was most likely something more going on. And then he brought the lamp to Lord Ezekiel's face and asked him to open his eyes even wider. Rose watched the doctor with concern, her hands pressed to her chest. Finally, he finished his examination and placed his lamp on the table. And then the doctor asked if it was true that the woman had splashed poison into his eyes. To this, the major answered positively and added that she had splashed the contents of the bottle in his face. Adjusting his glasses, Dr. Bremen said that he understood the reason for the Lord's blindness. He explained that he still couldn't see because it wasn't just the poison, which surprised the major. Clenching his hand into a fist, Lord Ezekiel asked if after all the effort he had put in, he was saying it wasn't the poison. Seeing how angry the major was, the doctor explained that the poison had undoubtedly played a role. But it was not poured directly into the man's eyes, therefore the volume that got in was small. But even so, the toxicity was extremely high, enough to require prolonged detoxification. Holding the bottle in his hands, the doctor noticed that the major was lucky that the poison only got into his eyes. And then he added that if the man had swallowed it, nothing would have saved him. At that moment, Rose's hand, which was resting on the major's fist, began to tremble. Noticing this, Lord Ezekiel asked what happened, but she replied that everything was fine. Dr. Bremen explained at this time that the pain caused by the poison forced the major to constantly rub his eyes. Hearing these words, the Lord confirmed the correctness of the doctor's conclusions. And Bremen explained that damaged eyelids and cornea, coupled with constant friction, all this led to blurred vision. And then he added that this was the true reason for the major's blindness. Upon hearing this, the man asked what he should do now. At this point, adjusting his glasses, Dr. Bremen said that detoxification was no longer effective here, and there was only one way out. The major was surprised by these words and asked what the only way out was in his situation. Smiling, Dr. Bremen said that Lord Ezekiel would need surgery. Hearing these words, the major and Rose, who was standing nearby, were very surprised, and the doctor explained that this was much more reliable than endless attempts at detoxification, and that he needed an operation inside the eye. Rose pressed her hand to her chest and asked excitedly if it was possible. To this, the doctor replied that he couldn't handle it alone, and he would call an assistant, because with an experienced surgeon, and most importantly, a young and talented one, the chances of success would increase significantly. And then he added that he happened to know an outstanding doctor in this field. The major responded that he had not expected the doctor to ultimately recommend surgery. Closing his briefcase, the man replied that as a doctor, he always suggests the path that offers the greatest chance of recovery. The doctor added that, after all, the major had already suffered more than anyone should. Smiling, Bremen said that it was time to restore the Lord's sight. The major didn't answer this, he just pursed his lips and thought. Sometime later, Selva's voice was heard in the mansion, informing the Lord that she had come to see him. When she came to him, she smiled and said that she had bought the red diamond, as he had asked. It is said that it once belonged to a royal collection that has disappeared from history, and because it is so large and valuable, many have tried to get their hands on it. Madame Selva sighed heavily and added that she had eventually managed to buy it at auction for the highest price. The woman also added that there was something else that Lord Ezekiel needed to know. Madame Selva said that Lord Akanaus attended the auction and competed with her for the red diamond until the very end. The major, smiling, was not surprised by this, because his brother never let such information slip. Then the man asked if a ring was the best option for a proposal, to which the woman replied that a ring was a tradition. After this, he asked Madame Selva to make a ring out of the diamond, and if it turned out to be too big for Rose, then it could be remade, to which the woman replied that she would make an order. The major added dreamily that as soon as he had the operation and opened his eyes, he would personally give the ring to Rose. At that moment, Madame Selva realized that the gentleman wanted to prepare everything in secret. As she left the major and walked down the corridor, the woman thought about how just recently she had been carrying him on her back, and now she was preparing a wedding ring. She wondered when Ezekiel had grown so much, and also that thanks to the beautiful lady, she shared his happiness. Remembering how happy Rose and Ezekiel looked together, the woman decided to start preparing for the meeting with the new mistress of the house. Sometime later, the sunlit mansion welcomed its guest. The woman who entered with a suitcase said that she had arrived because she had received news from Dr. Bremen. Placing her hand on her chest and bowing her head, she added that her name was Polina. Rose, who met her, was surprised to see a burn scar on her guest's face. Smiling, the girl invited Polina to pass, saying that she sincerely thanked her for her visit. When the doctor walked into the office and, opening her suitcase, took out a magnifying glass, she said that the major's operation would be incredibly difficult. Rose, hearing this, became slightly worried, looking at the woman. Polina explained that the man's eyelids would be fixed to prevent blinking, and the progress of the operation would be monitored through a magnifying lens, as the procedure involved excising damaged areas of the cornea. The major, hearing this, said that he had not even imagined the existence of such an intervention, to which the doctor seriously replied that the operation was not routine, so his surprise was understandable. Polina added that this surgical method is one of her personal developments. Anxiously, Rose asked if the major would feel pain. To this, the woman replied that the operation was associated with severe pain, and direct impact on the eyeball would cause an uncontrollable flow of tears. Polina added that assistance would be needed not only to wipe away tears, but also to hold the major's arms and legs to prevent convulsions. The woman said that she planned to use opium, to which Lord Ezekiel said that there was no need for that, and let them do it without it. Rose looked at the man in surprise, and Polina said that this was unacceptable, because without opium, the pain would be hellish. She added that if a strong man like him started to thrash about, it would be almost impossible to restrain him, and in that case, the needle could damage healthy eye tissue. Polina sadly said that the consequences would be irreversible, and he would curse the day he agreed to the operation. To this, the major confidently replied that he would endure, because Rose would be with him. And then, smiling and turning to her, he clarified this. Rose looked sadly at Lord Ezekiel but said nothing. At that moment, Polina realized that the girl was not just a servant. And then, sighing wearily, she said that regardless of Rose's presence, opium was necessary. When the major answered negatively, she added that this was a mandatory condition, but the man insisted that he did not need opium. Rose watched as Lord Ezekiel argued with Polina, her gaze remaining sad. And then, the girl suddenly asked what the risk of failure was for such a complex operation. Polina sighed and replied that it would be hypocritical to claim that he didn't exist. But one thing she could guarantee with absolute certainty. This is because if she cannot carry it out, then no doctor will take it on, because ophthalmology is her specialty. Lowering her head, Rose said that she understood everything, and the major suddenly asked why Polina was so obsessed with the eyes. The woman was surprised that Rose had not yet told the major about the terrible burn scar on her face. And then she told me that 8 years ago there was a fire in a university laboratory. She was alone in a classroom, locked in, and sleeping when it all started. Just when she thought it was the end, a classmate rushed into the burning building to find her. When he found Polina, he took the girl in his arms and asked her to hold on to him. The woman was very surprised that it was Aiden who found her. After all, they always competed for supremacy, which is probably why he noticed her absence. At that moment, they forgot about rivalry and pride and focused on surviving, on running together. Suddenly, the building collapsed, and flames scorched Polina's face, and shards of stone pierced Aiden's eyes, depriving him of sight. He screamed at her to leave him, but she couldn't, and dragging him along with her, she ran for their lives until she was out in the open air. They received immediate help, but Polina's face was left with deep scars, and he was completely blind. Rose, amazed by this story, excitedly asked what happened next. And Polina said that this was precisely the reason why she became an ophthalmologist, to which the girl remarked, which meant that the woman had completed her studies herself. To this, the doctor replied that her classmate had always been distinguished by his phenomenal insight, even during his student years, and this irritated her. And then, smiling, Polina added that Aiden was so talented that the professors allowed him to take the final exam orally. She said that thanks to this, they continued to compete until the very end and graduated together. And then her face lit up with a happy smile, and she said that after graduation, they got married. These words of the woman caused surprise on the faces of the major and Rose. Polina explained that her husband was unable to practice medicine and now works in a research laboratory. Pressing her hand to her chest, the woman added that she had sworn that she would restore his sight with her own hands, no matter what it cost her. But first, she will do everything to ensure that Lord Ezekiel's operation is successful.